I stood in the summoning circle while the light climbed past my knees, my chest, my eyes. And then, it stopped. No beast. Nothing crossed the veil for me. Every other kid in that hall got one. A storm wolf. A healing stag. Something that made the priests lean forward. I got an empty circle and a laugh that started somewhere in the back rows. So, I didn't argue. I hit the loudest one once, said nothing, and let the guards take my arms. The king gave me 72 hours outside the barrier and called it a chance. Everyone in that hall knew it was an execution with a countdown. Then I crossed the barrier, and the dead phone in my pocket lit up. 2 lines. 100 times experience. 100 times skill amplification. They threw away the kid who couldn't summon a beast. Out there, alone, every useless skill I touched was about to become something nobody in that kingdom could survive. The room was enormous. That was the first thing I could actually process, the scale of it. Ceilings that climbed far enough to lose detail in the upper dark, columns carved in pairs with something between them that glowed faint silver. A floor of pale marble veined gold, and inlaid into the floor in a ring formation, 43 identical circles drawn in what looked like crushed moonstone. 1 circle per student. 43, I counted without meaning to. Our homeroom class was exactly 43. Behind us and to the sides, ranked in ordered rows on a raised gallery, stood men and women in silver robes and gold-edged hoods. Their faces were calm, with the specific calm of people who had done this before and found it routine. Priests, I would learn. To the far wall, a throne had been carved directly out of the stone, dragon shapes rising along its back, and the man seated in it was watching us with the patient attention of someone reviewing a shipment he had ordered. That was the king. He looked like a king, the way a mountain looks like a mountain. Not because someone told you what it was, but because the whole room organized itself around him. Around me, the class began to move. Not running, nobody ran. More like a collective drift as everyone turned and turned again and tried to take in all of it at once. I heard Daiki's voice before I saw him, which was always how it worked with Daiki. Hall of Summoning, he said, not surprised. Satisfied, like he had ordered this too, and it arrived on time. We got isekai'd. Already standing straight, already reading the room for where the power lived. Mika was to my left, close enough that our shoulders almost touched. She was looking at the circles on the floor with the careful expression she had when she was adding things up and not ready to share the answer yet. We had been together in the low-key, defined by habit way you sometimes fall into with someone you've known since middle school, and one of the side effects is that silence between you doesn't always mean anything. My hand went to my pocket without me directing it there. Old habit. Checking for the phone. It was there. Still cracked across the upper corner, same as always. I had dropped it off a bike at the end of second year and never replaced the screen because the thing still worked fine. Dark screen now. No signal. Wrong world entirely. But it was here. That mattered, and I did not know why yet. A herald stepped forward from the line of priests. Deep voice built for spaces like this. Cadence of someone who had given this speech before and intended to give it again. He told us what we were. We were summoned heroes. Each generation, when the first great demon seal began to weaken, the kingdom's highest priests drew on the old summoning rite and reached across worlds for candidates. Always young. Always from the same world. Ours, though no one could say exactly why. There was a theory about the density of potential in populations untouched by beast cultivation. The heralds did not elaborate. In this world, the basis of power was the beast bond. A person's strength was defined not by body or trained technique, but by the beasts they could call, bond, and carry. The bonding was not a contract of ownership. The herald was careful about that word. He said covenant instead, which I noted. Governments very particular about how they described their power arrangements were usually governments that had thought about it hard because someone had challenged the description. The summoning ceremony would happen in sequence. Each student would step into their assigned circle. The circle would pull from the veil between the physical world and the beast realm, and the student's compatible beast would appear. Everyone got a beast. The herald said it with the confidence of a man describing a proven system. I stood in my circle and thought about the word covenant and the careful way the herald had reached for it. And I kept my hand near my pocket, where the cracked phone sat dark and quiet and wrong. Because when the herald had listed the things that would not survive the transport, electronic devices, manufactured materials from our world, anything that resonated with technology frequencies, I had looked down at my cracked screen and waited for it to dissolve. It hadn't, and nobody else in the class seemed to still have theirs. The ceremony started with the first row. A priest led each student to their circle by name. The silver light dolt from the floor up, the veil thinned, and the beast came through. One at a time. Each student, each circle, each bond forming in sequence. The first 10 went quickly. Wolves, mostly, common tier, solid and respected. A water type with scales threaded through its coat. A fire type with ember points at its ears. Hashimoto, who played rugby, got a shadow class bull that made 2 priests step back when it manifested. He looked like he might cry. The class got loud. That collective euphoria of a group all receiving good news at once. I stood in my circle and watched. And on the third bond, I noticed something I didn't have a word for yet. When each beast finished crossing, the veil behind it didn't just close, it closed a specific way, a small hard seam, the way a latch seats, not the way a curtain falls. Nobody else was watching the veil. Everyone was watching the beasts. I filed it, without knowing what it meant, next to the other thing I couldn't explain, the phone in my pocket that should have dissolved on arrival and hadn't. Mika went before Daiki. The priest called her name, and she walked to her circle with the notepad tucked under her arm, and for a moment in the building light I thought she looked back at me, or maybe she looked at the circle to her left. The circles were close, it was hard to tell. The light peaked, the veil parted. A stag stepped through. It was shoulder height on Mika, built from the same material as late afternoon winter light, not quite white, not quite gold. Along its legs and ribs the coat gave way to something luminous that pulsed slow and warm. Gilded healing stag. Rare category, the clergy murmured in the low appreciative way people murmur when something expensive arrives. Mika reached out one hand. The stag lowered its head and placed its nose against her palm. Bond complete. In the gallery 2 older priests exchanged a look. The kind that said her future allocation in whatever system this kingdom used for assigning heroes had just been revised upward. I noted the revision. I noted the stag, I noted the look. Then Daiki's name was called. He walked to his circle the way people walk onto stages, weight forward, measured pace, the deliberateness of someone who knows they are being watched and finds it motivating. He stood in the center with his feet apart and his jaw set and looked at the ceiling and waited. The light took longer with Daiki. Close to a full minute. The silver build climbed past my waist, past my chest, past my eyeline. The hall went quiet. Even students who had just bonded went quiet. Their beasts went still. At the peak, the veil didn't part. It split. The storm wolf came through a gap in the air like it had been waiting on the other side, and the gap was simply the door it had been expecting to open. 7 feet at the shoulder. Cobalt blue and black fur with crackling blue-white arcs of lightning orbiting every point of its body, its mane, its feet, the ridge of its back, circling the wolf like orbiting weather without discharging on the floor. Its eyes were pale yellow and they glowed, not a wolf class. Not even a named wolf class. A-tier storm wolf. The wolf was magnificent, genuinely. But in the moment it came through the split, there had been something in the way the veil closed behind it. Not like a door swinging shut, like a lock clicking. As if the wolf had not crossed over freely, as if it had been moved. I could not say anything useful with that yet. I filed it. The herald's voice went careful in a specific way that meant he was working to make it sound not careful. He announced the tier. He said it was an exceptional manifestation. He said the kingdom was honored. The hall erupted. Students, clergy, the gallery on its feet. Even 2 armored guards near the throne had turned to look, and guards at that level were trained to look at threats, not ceremonies. Daiki put one hand to the storm wolf's jaw. The wolf pressed into his hand, lightning arced from its mane and ran down his arm, and he let it travel through him and ground out at his feet, and looked at his hand like the lightning belonged to him now. It did. His face opened up in a way I had not seen before, the expression of someone who has spent a long time believing something about himself and has just been given public proof. He turned to the class and raised one hand like a conductor. They cheered again. I did not cheer. That was not something I gave him. The ceremony continued. More bonds. More cheers. I stood in my circle, waiting. My name was called third from last. The priest did it correctly, full name, formal inflection, the cadence that matched all the others. Nothing that marked the moment as different. I walked to my circle. The class was winding down. Most students had their beasts beside them or orbiting their assigned space. Wolves close to the floor, aerial types near the ceiling, elementals throwing small ambient effects across the marble. The hall was warm with a combined light of 41 successful bonds. I stepped into the circle. Stood in the center, feet apart. Breathed steady. The priest began the invocation. The silver light started in the floor lines and spread outward the way it had for everyone else. From the center, climbing the boundary of the circle, building upward in a column around me. I felt it, faintly. Not warmth, more like pressure at the edges of something. An awareness of the veil, the thin place between this world and wherever the beast realm lived. I waited. The light climbed to my waist, to my chest. And then it stopped, not dramatically. It didn't cut out. It simply plateaued at the height of my ribcage and held there, like a process that had reached the end of its instructions and was waiting for a next step that wasn't coming. The priest paused. He tried again. Same words, same cadence. The light held where it was and didn't move. No veil movement. No pull from the other side. Nothing. He exchanged a look with the priest beside him. A second priest looked at a document in his hand and back at me and made a small correcting gesture, as if maybe the mistake was administrative. A third priest produced a different invocation from a folded paper in his robe. The first priest tried again with the new words. The light flickered once, not building, an almost motion. Then it went out. The hall noticed. That was the part I had not quite prepared for, the way a crowd registers a failure in something that had worked 41 times in a row, not loud. Something worse? The specific quiet of 41 people all stopping what they were doing simultaneously and directing their attention at the same place, at me. In the empty circle, in the dark. The circle stayed dark. I kept my face still. A still face is a surface. People can't tell what you're doing behind it, which means they can't tell if what they're doing is landing. Something shifted in my pocket. Not vibration, more like a weight redistribution, the way an object moves when the thing it was resting against moves away. The phone felt heavier for a moment, or lighter. Then it gave a single silent pulse, so faint I might have invented it, and went still. I did not look down at it. One of the students in the front row laughed, short, involuntary, swallowed fast. He looked guilty immediately after. A second student, Hayashi, back row, who had bonded to Serpent class and seemed very confident about it, didn't bother swallowing the smile. Then Daiki said, from somewhere to my right, no beast for Ren. Not unkind. Not cruel. Just Daiki doing the thing Daiki did, which was state the obvious in the tone of a man reading aloud from a document he himself authored. His stormwolf sat beside him with its enormous head low and its yellow eyes on me, and the lightning in its mane made a continuous low sound like something about to happen. More students laughed. Not all of them. The specific few who had been waiting for someone to set the tone, and Daiki had said it. I stood in the dark circle and let them. The lead priest turned toward the throne and gave a small deferential motion, an apology for an anomaly in a system not supposed to have anomalies. The king made a small wave that meant deal with it. The head priest approached me directly. Polite, voice even and professional. He asked if I had felt anything during the invocation, any resonance, any pull from the veil. I told him I had felt something faint at the start. He made a note of that. He said it was possible I was a late resonance candidate, that some summoning bonds took longer to stabilize. He said there were historical precedents. He said this in a way that suggested the historical precedents had not ended well. I thanked him for saying it anyway. He asked me to try the circle one more time. The invocation ran from the top. The light did not appear at all this time, just stone floor and nothing else. The priest folded his hands. He said, step out of the circle, please. I stepped out. 41 beasts in the hall watched me do it. And somewhere in my pocket, the cracked phone sat heavy and wrong and untranslated, the one thing that had come through the crossing that wasn't supposed to. The informal period after the ceremony was how you could tell who a person actually was. Structured things tell you how people perform. The unscripted stretch, when the priests were conferring, was the test. The class rearranged itself the way metal filings rearrange around a magnet. Daiki was the magnet. A stormwolf is a physical argument for leadership that no one had standing to counter. Within about 4 minutes, the social hierarchy of this new world had been written without a word being said about it. Mika was in the inner circle, not because Daiki had pulled her there. Because she had walked there, she was not glancing back. She stood with her shoulder angled in, her gilded healing stag behind her, attention on the conversation Daiki was having with 2 priests, someone who had assessed the room and moved to the most defensible position. Sensible. Strategic. What you did when you had a rare class beast and the most powerful person in the room was 3 feet away. It was also not about me. That was the part that cleared things up. Not that she'd walked over to him, that she hadn't thought to look back. That wasn't a betrayal requires intention. It was a preference, expressed clearly in a moment that had no script to hide behind. I stopped watching her. Daiki noticed me anyway. He separated from his group with the easy confidence of someone who has enough credit to briefly leave the center without losing it, and walked over to where I was standing at the side of the hall with my empty hands and my dead phone and no circle behind me anymore. He stopped about 2 feet away. The stormwolf trailed him, its shoulder roughly level with his own, which put its lightning mane at approximately my chest height. Not threatening. Not doing nothing. Rough break, Daiki said. Technically sympathetic. The tone was the problem. The tone of someone who finds the misfortune of others primarily interesting as data. I said, sure. He looked at my pocket. At the faint rectangular outline of the phone. That thing's still alive? Screen's dark. Same as everything. Wild that it's still there. Genuine curiosity, which was worse. The priest said tech doesn't survive the crossing. They said a lot of things. He looked at me with the evaluating expression he used on new information. So, what's the plan? They going to rerun the ceremony? I said. I don't know. That was the answer he expected. The king's going to want to know what to do with you. I imagine so. The class is going to need someone who can fight, he said. Not threatening. Architectural. Laying out a building. Demon Lord timelines in play. We'll need everyone who can pull their weight. There it was. That was the shape of the thing. I understand, I said. He looked at me for another beat, deciding whether what he saw on my face matched what he expected. I gave him the still surface and let him decide for himself. Then he walked back to the center of the room. I thought about the phrase, pull their weight. The implication that weight was the default and pulling was the extra condition placed on people who weren't generating anything on their own. I thought about it for approximately 30 seconds. Then I walked across the hall to where Daiki was standing with his wolf and 3 priests and Mika's healing stag making a pretty tableau, and I stopped behind his left shoulder. He turned because people always turned when they sensed someone at their shoulder. I hit him once. Flat, hard, exactly where the jaw meets the ear on the left side. He went sideways, not down. Daiki had good reflexes and caught himself on one foot, but sideways, stumbling, one hand to the floor and back up. The storm wolf came to its feet, and the lightning in its mane spiked and every beast in the hall shifted. Everything went very quiet. Daiki straightened, he touched his jaw. He looked at his hand and then at me, and his face said a number of things, the most important of which was genuine complete surprise. The expression of someone who had not predicted this outcome and was recalculating everything. I said, I heard you. That was all. The guards reached me before anyone else moved. Fast, professional. I did not resist. There was no version of this where I fought my way out of a royal hall full of 41 beast-bonded classmates and a stormwolf in an elevated state. I stood still and let them take my arms. The king's voice crossed the hall without being raised. He said, bring him forward. They brought me forward. He looked at me with an additional element now, the element of a problem that had complicated itself beyond his initial calculation. He told me I had 72 hours. Outside the castle barrier, I would survive by whatever means I could arrange. If I returned alive after 72 hours, I would be evaluated for participation in the Demon Lord campaign. If I did not return, the kingdom would note my absence and proceed without me. He said it with absolute evenness, not a death sentence by name but by design, and everyone in the hall knew that. I said, understood, Your Majesty. He blinked. That was the only reaction I got, and I took it. The guards walked me to the main gate. Behind me, as the gate began to close, I heard the hall restart. The specific rush of sound a crowd makes when a resolved tension finally releases. Daiki saying something the distance turned into noise before it reached me. Mika didn't say anything. I knew that without looking because I had known her long enough to know what her silence sounded like. The gate closed. Cold air. Dark road. The castle behind me with its lights and its 42 bonded heroes. And somewhere ahead, the forest, and 72 hours to be something the king had not thought to calculate for. The road outside the castle gate ran north-south along the base of the outer wall for about a quarter mile in each direction before it bent away into the dark. I went south. Not because south was better, because south was downhill and putting the cold north wind at my back felt like the one small advantage available in the first 60 seconds of my 72-hour deadline. What I had, the clothes on my back, which were a Japanese school uniform and therefore useless as status signals but functional as actual clothing. A cracked dead phone. The contents of my pockets, a mechanical pencil, 4 yen coins, a folded train ticket, a piece of gum and foil, and nothing that would kill a beast. What I knew about this world, from 20 minutes in a hall, beast bonds were the basis of power. The kingdom's summoning system was the primary method of establishing them. There was a Demon Lord timeline in progress. The 72 hours the king had given me was not a genuine survival opportunity. It was a legal mechanism for removing me from the castle without calling it an execution. What I did not know, anything useful about the terrain beyond the wall, what was in the forest to the south, whether the castle's outer perimeter had patrols, whether creatures in this world hunted by smell or sound or something else. I made 2 decisions in the first 10 minutes. The first, I was not going to process the Mika situation right now. There was nothing actionable in it. File it, return when alive enough to have opinions. The second, I was going to survive this, not as a statement of will but as a working assumption, because the alternative produced no useful actions. The road curved away from the wall and became a dirt path at the point where the castle's exterior lighting gave out. I kept moving. No physical wall on this side. The kingdom's barrier was a suppression field. It prevented passage by beast-class entities, not human. The barrier was for beasts, not for a beastless exile walking south in school shoes. I found that somewhat ironic. I skirted the forest edge, watching the tree line. The sounds were different from a Japanese forest. Deeper register, longer intervals, the occasional tone with no category in my experience. Some of that was the dark and cold. Some of it was probably not. I had not eaten since lunch. Adrenaline still running, which was useful in the short term. The phone sat dead in my pocket. I checked it twice in the first 20 minutes. Both times, dark screen, the same cracked weight. It had not dissolved in the crossing, had not activated in the ceremony. It did none of the things a system activation did in stories. It continued to be a phone. I put it away. Around the 40-minute mark, I found water, a stream cutting across the path. I drank from it. Dehydration was a faster problem than waterborne illness. I followed the stream edge west, away from the road and into the field between the road and the tree line. The open road was visible from the castle gate. Visible was a variable to remove if I could. The forest here had a different quality, a pressure, the sensation of a space occupied by things I didn't have data on yet. My body was giving me an alert my reasoning couldn't yet translate. I respected it. I didn't go in yet. I found a spot against the tree line where a root formation made something close to shelter from 3 directions, and sat with my back against the bark and my eyes on the field. The phone was still dark. The sky above was wrong. Star patterns I didn't recognize, and 2 moons, small and large, both visible. 2 moons, different world. No beast, no allies, no equipment. 71 hours and change. I thought about the word covenant, and about the way the veil had settled behind Daiki's Stormwolf like a door being locked, and about a phone that should have dissolved and hadn't. Then I stopped thinking and watched the field, because the trees behind me had made a sound with no animal category in my experience, and I needed to find out what was making it. There was nothing visible. The sound did not repeat. I sat against the root formation and waited for the forest to decide whether it was going to be patient with me or not, and I kept my breathing even and my thinking useful, and I did not look at my phone again. It would either do something or it wouldn't. I had 69 hours left either way. I do not know exactly when I crossed the barrier. The Herald had described it as the edge of the castle's suppression field, extending roughly 200 meters from the outer wall in all directions. I had been walking away from the wall for close to an hour. I should have been past it already. Barriers don't announce themselves when you pass through them. What happened was this. I was crouched at the stream's second crossing point, refilling a folded paper cup I had made from the train ticket, inadequate but better than hands, when the phone stopped being dead. No sound. No vibration. Just light. Not bright. Not dramatic. A low, steady glow through the fabric of the uniform pocket. I set the water down. I took the phone out. The screen was on. The crack was still there, but behind it the screen was alive and showing something that was not any home screen I had ever put on this phone. 3 lines of text, white on black, SY stem, suppression removed. I read it. I looked at the castle lights in the far distance and then at the phone again. The text held for about 4 seconds. Then it scrolled, replaced by a new display, not a menu, more like a loading sequence. Information appearing line by line, as if each piece needed to be processed before the next could be shown. Bir ir ida. Status, Exiled. Pos unclassified system type. Amplification lattice. Suppressed 47 days, 12 hours, 9 minutes. Current active abilities, 100 times experience gain. 100 times, skill amplification. I read the abilities twice. Then I sat down on the stream bank, in the dark, in a world with 2 moons and no exit, and ran the math. 100 times experience gain. If a standard weak creature yielded 10 points, I received 1,000, 2 full levels per week kill on the early curve. The class, with ceremony bonuses, was probably level 2 or 3. I could reach 10 before morning if I was careful. I set the phone down in the grass, face up, and stood. There was a fallen branch at the stream bank edge, arm length, still with some flex in it. I picked it up and walked into the tree line. 10 meters in, I stopped at a chest-diameter trunk and swung the stick at it, full arm. The stick hit bark and broke. I looked at the 2 pieces. Level 1. Normal human striking force. No passive physical amplification from the system at all. The 100 times would apply to skills, not to the baseline body carrying them. That mattered. The math would compound on experience and on skills. It would not let me pretend my body was anything other than what it currently was. I walked back to the stream bank and picked up the phone. 100 times skill amplification. Every skill I acquired amplified 100 times before settling in. I didn't know the ceiling. The suppression field had covered the system since we arrived, but the counter said 47 days, which I could not yet explain, and set aside. The phone continued scrolling. Limitation, beast summoning unavailable. I read this and felt it settle with the specific weight of a confirmed suspicion. Not couldn't, yet. Not requires different conditions. Unavailable. My system did not include free beast summoning as a function. Alternate beast acquisition, bond through conquest. A beast defeated or subdued by the bearer may elect to reincarnate as a familiar through voluntary bond. No contract. No covenant. Consent-based and irrevocable. I read that once and put the phone in my hand, screen facing out. There was nothing else to learn sitting on a stream bank in the dark, and the low light the screen cast was the best illumination I had. I folded what remained of the train ticket, pocketed the wet paper, and stood. The castle lights were small and far behind me. Ahead, the forest was close and dark and completely indifferent to what I had just read. I turned on the phone's torch function, which worked because whatever the phone was now, it was not a normal phone anymore, and I walked into the trees. I read the bond through conquest line again as I walked, and the third time it stopped being a mechanic and became a comparison. The Herald had used covenant instead of contract, careful about the distinction. The kingdom's system forced bonds. My system earned them. That was the inversion. The phone gave me one more line before the display settled into a status view. Current level 1 available XP 0. SKLS noon 68 hours. Level 1, no skills. No beast, no food, no equipment, no allies. And a system that would turn every weak skill in this world into something that couldn't be classified. Level 1. Let's go. The forest had a floor of dry pine needles and decomposed something that gave slightly under my shoes, and a canopy dense enough that the phone's torch caught on the nearest trunks and threw most of the depth into shadow. I moved, carefully. Careful and slow are different things. Slow means you're managing fear, careful means you're managing information. I was managing information. The sounds of the forest, wind in the upper canopy, the intermittent tick of cooling bark contracting in the cold, a water source somewhere east, and beneath all of it, at a frequency just at the edge of my ability to separate it from background noise, movement. Not close, not immediate, but present. I killed the torch and stood in the dark for 40 seconds, letting my eyes adjust and my ears recalibrate to what the torch had been drowning out. The movement resolved into two separate sources. One was northeast, moving roughly parallel to me and not tracking toward me. The second was directly ahead at maybe 30 meters and not moving, stationary and silent in a dark forest at night, meant predator or nothing. The shape I was beginning to make out was not stump-shaped, roughly the size of a cat. Lower to the ground. Sitting. I stood very still. It did not charge. It did not retreat. It sat with the complete stillness of something that had decided to wait me out. After about 20 seconds, I turned the torch back on, low angle, not aimed directly at it. The phone gave me a notification in the lower corner of the screen. Shadow Ferret Seekelmon, Level 2 Combat Class, Ambush Skirmish. Threat to undefended targets. EXP Yield Standard, 8. My multiplier, 100 times, 800 EXP per ferret. If early level scaling held at roughly 5 to 600 per level, one ferret was more than a full level for me. The problem was I had no weapon, and the ferret was fast, and ambush-class creatures were built for a target that didn't know what was coming. I did. A partial advantage, not a sufficient one. I backed up and found a branch by touch, longer than my arm, hardwood. The ferret watched with what I can only describe as professional disdain, then a shift in its shoulders, about to move. I moved first, and the ambush creature, expecting to move first itself, hesitated half a second. I brought the branch down. A glancing hit on its hindquarters, it twisted, bit clean through the wood, and launched off. I tracked it by sound and swung again when the sound put it under my arc. Second hit was cleaner. The ferret went still. Shadow Ferret defeated. XP gained, EIG 800. Level up twice, current level 3. Something offered itself, not a sound or a sight, more like a prompt in the back of my awareness. A skill available to accept or decline. Ground adaptation, common skill, available. A very minor skill. Slightly improved footing on uneven terrain. Good for farmers, the kind of thing no one would waste a summoning slot on. I took it precisely because it was worthless. Amplifying, terrain reading amplified. The world shifted. Within a 20-foot radius, the forest floor stopped being unknown and became information, a pressure awareness of which patches would hold a fast lateral step and which were soft, where roots ran close, where a plant would roll an ankle. A sense, the way proprioception is a sense. One minor skill given to farmers so they didn't trip in their own fields. Amplified 100 times, a real-time combat terrain map. I stood for a moment in the new awareness and breathed. Then I reset my grip on the branch, planted my feet in a position that terrain reading told me was solid. Left foot on a compressed root, right foot on packed earth, no gaps under either. And I watched the dark. The second sound from 20 minutes ago, the one moving roughly parallel, had changed direction. It was moving toward me. Shadow Ferret Common, Level 3 1 level higher. The fight was a minute long. I took a bite on the left forearm through the uniform sleeve. It got through the fabric but not deep, a line of pain and then adrenaline covering it. I knocked the ferret down twice before it stopped moving. EXP gained, EIGHT 150. I level up, Seerent level, 4R. 2 new skills. Minor Wound Close Healer Tire 0. Amplifying, Full Restoration. KEE, AR Tracker Passive. A Amplifying, Precision Hearing Full Restoration. I applied it to the bite without entirely knowing how. The instruction was implicit in the system. The bite closed in about 6 seconds, the wound simply turning back into uninjured arm. Strange to experience, stranger to think about too hard. Precision hearing opened the forest, the way a new lens opens a field of view. The water source, clear now, 80 meters east. The parallel movement from earlier had been at least 2 creatures, not one, something moving in loose association. I held very still and listened. And then, at the edge of what precision hearing could resolve from the broader soundscape, I caught something that didn't fit. Small feet. Lightweight, moving in a deliberate pattern, Not predatory, not the stalking rhythm I had just learned from 2 ferret ambushes, moving like something going somewhere specific. Moving toward me, pausing. Moving again. Then stopping, somewhere between 2 close-set trees at about 20 meters, and not moving anymore. Waiting. I aimed the torch at the gap between the trees. Pure white fur, silver blue light at the forehead. Pink inner ears angled forward. 2 eyes that reflected the torch with the specific quality of something that had decided looking directly back at me was the appropriate response. Moon hair rare, level 19 bond, eligible, yes. I stared at that for a moment. Level 19. I was level 4. The moon hair looked at the phone screen. Looked at me. Twitched one ear in a direction that was not toward the forest I had come from. Then it turned and moved precisely 10 meters in that direction and stopped again, looking back. I have no rational justification for what I did next. I followed it. The moon hair moved with the specific economy of a creature that knew exactly where it was going and had no patience for pace setting. I kept up because of terrain reading. I knew where my feet were going before they arrived, which freed enough attention to hold the hare's white shape at the edge of my torchlight. Precision hearing tracked its footfalls even when it moved ahead of my light, a distinctive gait, light and deliberate, not fleeing or hunting. Navigating. We went south-southwest for about 12 minutes. Then the hare stopped at the edge of a small clearing, and I saw what it had led me to. The ground dropped, a slope, old and gradual, ending at a circular opening in the earth about 2 meters across. Roots from surrounding trees curved over the lip like natural architecture, and the shaft below was dark enough that my torch didn't reach the bottom. Hand-cut, not natural, tool marks on the inner stone at the top few feet, worn smooth by years of moisture and root growth. Old construction. The moon hare sat at the edge and looked at me. I put the phone between my teeth for the light and climbed down. 8 meters. Old handholds cut into the stone in a ladder pattern, worn but functional. At the bottom, a low passage, stone floor, lit by something that had nothing to do with my torch. Blue torches. Not fire, no heat, no smoke, no flicker. A clean blue light from stone sconces mounted at intervals along the passage walls. They had never gone out. The passage opened into a chamber after about 30 meters. Large enough that the blue torchlight didn't fully reach the back walls. The floor was carved, not decorated, mapped. The whole surface was a relief of beast markings in a style older than everything I had seen in the castle above. Creatures I didn't have names for yet. Against the wall to my right, a stone bench with collapsed packing material, and beside it a chest. Wood and iron, heavy, hinges corroded but the latch intact. No lock. I opened the chest. Glass vials in a wooden rack, liquid inside each one still clear. A blade and leather sheath, short, single edge, good steel that had not rusted because the leather had kept the air from it. A compact fire kit in an oiled cloth wrap, dried rations in sealed ceramic containers. At the bottom of the rack, a smooth disc of material that was neither glass nor stone, something between the two, glowing faintly with the same blue as the torches. I put the blade on and drank one vial slowly, unknown, but the alternative was nothing. It tasted like nothing at all, just a warmth at my sternum that spread and settled into steadiness, and the fatigue I'd been carrying since the ceremony dropped noticeably. The glowing disc gave me a prompt. SK Ill Shard, Minor Recovery, Healer Tai 1. Touch to absorb. I picked it up. It dissolved into my hand, a process that felt like holding ice that melted very fast but left warmth instead of cold. Skill, absorbed, minor recovery, amplifying. AMP IFID SKL, full restoration advanced note. Previous skill, full restoration. Merged with current absorption. Unified skill upgraded. I tested it on a scrape from the shaft climb. The scrape closed completely, cleanly, in approximately 2 seconds. Advanced full restoration was apparently 2 seconds and completely clean. A second skill prompt appeared, not from the shard but from the general environment. Passive acquisition from prolonged presence in a dense storage space. Minar organization, sense utility, extremely common, available. A sense for organizing small objects efficiently. Good for craftsmen, merchants, librarians, and no one holding a weapon. The most useless name I had seen yet, which, by now, was starting to read less like a warning and more like a recommendation. I took it. Am Pricket Dimension. Borkit Dimension Storage Class. A fold that opened without opening. A space that hadn't existed becoming accessible. The phone showed me the specs: interior volume roughly 3 cubic meters, weight of stored objects effectively 0, contents invisible to external scanning. Access, intentional, my intention only. I moved the chest's contents into it. All of it, the remaining vials, the rations, the fire kit, gone, into a space I could reach but no one else could see. I sat in the empty space where the chest had been. 3 of the most trivial abilities in a system built around beast combat and divine covenants. Terrain sense, a healer's minor touch, the organizational ability of a shipping clerk. amplified into a combat terrain map, a restoration that closed wounds in seconds, and portable storage with no carry weight. The worse the original skill, the higher the ceiling. 100 times up from near zero wasn't a modest improvement. It was a complete category change. Behind me, at the passage entrance, a sound. Small feet, deliberate pace. The moon hare entered the chamber. It stopped in the center of the carved floor relief, looked at me on the stone bench was my new blade and my pocket dimension, and then, I am not inventing this. It sat down and yawned. A long, slow, full-jaw yawn, with the specific contentment of a creature that had put in a reasonable amount of effort and found the outcome satisfactory. I said, "This is your cave." It looked at me. "You've known about it for a while." It blinked once, slowly. I looked at the carvings on the floor. The beast reliefs on the walls. The blue torches that had never gone out. "You brought me here on purpose," I said. The moon hare turned its back to me, adjusted its position on the carved floor with the dignity of a creature that made decisions and found them correct, and closed its eyes. I sat in the blue light and ate some rations, and tried to figure out what a level 19 rare class beast wanted with a freshly exiled level 4. Nothing immediately presented itself. I went back to leveling, deeper in the cave where small creatures moved in the walls, and let the question sit. Here is what the next 4 hours looked like. The cave system extended deeper than the main chamber in 2 directions. A left branch tunnel that climbed slightly before ending at a collapsed section, and a right branch tunnel that descended in a gentle spiral and opened into a series of connected cavern rooms, each smaller than the last, each occupied. Cave crawlers first. Insect class, low tier, crustacean bodies with 6 legs and a bite that had more pressure behind it than something that size had any right to produce. In a group, they were a problem. Individually, with terrain reading telling me where my feet were, and precision hearing telling me where the next one was in the dark, they were 1 hit each if I was patient. I was patient. EXP gained, 400. Cave crawler, level 1, 4 kills, 100 times modifier. Level up, 3 times. See Urant level 7. 2 skills from cave crawler combat. Minimal footprint stealth. Common, amplifying. Amplifying, silence. Walk asective. Pest sense, tracker. Very common, amplifying. Amplifying, secreture. Awarence's passive field. Silence walk, when active. My movement generated no sound detectable by most creatures at normal range. Creature awareness, a passive field radiating 10 meters in all directions, any living creature within it registering as a directional sense, not precision, but a definite there and approximate where. Like soft focus eyes in a sphere around me. I stood in the second cavern room with 6 abilities and thought about what I had built in 4 hours from nothing. Current level, 7. Class estimate, end of day 1, 4 to 6 with ceremony bonuses. I might already be ahead. The third cavern room had a cave crawler colony, not singles or pairs, a structured group, a dozen of them with a shared territory marker that made them defend collectively. The fight was harder. I took 3 bites and a claw rake across the forearm. Full restoration dealt with the wounds. I dealt with the colony, one at a time, learning where each armored body was soft. Seam. Seam scenes combat. Common. Amplifying. Reading PO. Weak point reading passive. Weak point reading. Against any creature under observation, the low armor gaps and structural stress points surfaced as a directed sense, the way creature awareness surfaced position, not a targeting system. A place to look first. EXP gained, 1,200. Group modifier applied. Level up, twice. Current level, 9. New skill from the colony fight, not combat sourced but from the colony structure itself. Sustained proximity to an organized group seemed to count as exposure to the organizational mechanic. HIV, signal sense, swarm tracking, UN common, amplifying, mind reading passive. The tooltip, passive ability allowing the bearer to perceive the shared decision-making intent of groups operating on collective behavior patterns, not telepathy, not words or explicit thoughts. Emotional direction and physical intent within groups. The phrase it used was, behavioral prediction layer. A behavioral prediction layer. For groups. Passive. I thought about the Demon Lord timeline and the class of 42 heroes and a king who had made a political calculation about me without reading the full document first and kept moving. The fourth room had nothing alive in it. What it had was a section of wall where the stone was a different color, not dramatically different, a shade variation that terrain reading flagged the moment I entered. Newer stone. The weathering pattern was shallower. Something had been filled in. I pressed my palm against it. Behind the stone, a cavity. Maybe 2 meters deep with something inside that generated a faint thermal signature just above ambient. Alive. Or something that had been alive and left warmth behind. I didn't have the tools to open it yet. I moved on. By the time I came back to the main chamber, I was level 12. The moon hare was still there, in the center of the carved floor, watching my return with the alert attention of a teacher observing a student's work. I sat across from it and held out a dried ration piece, not to feed it, just to see. It regarded the offering, regarded me, and pointedly did not take it. I put it back in the pocket dimension. "You've seen the filled wall in the 4th room," I said. It said nothing. It was a rabbit. But its ears moved, one forward, one at an angle that creature awareness read as directed attention, the physical tell a creature makes when something being addressed is considered relevant. Filled wall. Relevant. I was level 12, talking to a rabbit in a cave in a world I had arrived in 18 hours ago. This was fine. I took stock of my full system state. Level 12 ACTI abilities, terrain reading, precision hearing, creature awareness. Silence walk for tech. Mind reading. Passive abilities, full restoration, packet dimension. Pending quickstep. QUICK step, movement tires, not movement. Mono application. Common movement skill. One-time burst of additional leg speed, approximately 50% normal velocity, lasting 1 step, used by runners and messengers. Essentially nothing. 1 amplified step at 100 times the base effect. That was not a step anymore. I ran the numbers, 1 step at 5000% normal velocity. A before position and an after position with no transit between them. There was nothing to deliberate on that one. AMPL, Flash ST active plank sortip, plank class. Tooltip, instantly relocates bear to any point within line of sight range, maximum 40 meters. No cooldown stated. Stamina cost, moderate per use. I used it once, in the chamber, from my position on the floor to the far wall. The experience was, the floor. Then the wall. No sensation of the space between. I sat against the far wall. Level 12. No beast. Long-range blink, terrain and creature sense in a sphere around me, healing that closed wounds in seconds, portable storage. Not a fair comparison yet. Their bonds would grow, and Daiki's Stormwolf started at a tier that took most tamers years to reach. I wasn't ahead in any absolute sense. But I wasn't done. 60 hours left. Level 12, let's keep going. By the second morning, the moon hare had moved from the carved floor to a ledge about 3 feet off the ground on the east wall of the chamber. From the ledge, it had an unobstructed view of the entire chamber and both tunnel entrances. It was watching, not resting. I had slept 4 hours. Functional minimum, against the wall nearest the main chamber's largest blue torch. The light was constant and didn't cycle with any external daylight pattern, which made time management harder than it should have been. I was tracking by the phone's clock function, which had activated with everything else and was now running on a battery that should have been dead 2 years ago and apparently was not. 52 hours, 14 minutes remaining on the Exiled deadline. Level 14, from the pre-dawn session in the right tunnel where I had found a new category of cave creature, moss slugs, level 3, slow, poor offense, high EXP per unit. 140 per slug at 100 times modifier. 90 seconds of work each. Current abilities, 10. Full restoration, pocket dimension, terrain reading, precision hearing, creature awareness, pack mind reading, silence walk, flash step, and 2 new ones from the pre-dawn session. Lightfoot amplify to void step prep, spatial prepositioning, untested, and fire spark amplified to controlled ember. Directional heat generation in a small focused radius without visible flame. I tested controlled ember on a section of cave wall to see what it did in practice. It raised the temperature of a palm-sized area by roughly 40 degrees Celsius in about 2 seconds. Not a weapon, not yet. But hot spots in darkness were visible to creatures that hunted by thermal signature, which meant I could probably set false targets. I noted that and moved on. The moon hare had come down from its ledge. It was on the chamber floor, centered. Not watching the tunnels. Watching me. I had been working on the blade form, just the logical mechanics of a short single edge, weight back, lead with the non-knife hand to intercept, cut toward the body on the inside. Against the air for about 20 minutes. The moon hare watched with ears forward. I stopped. Critique? Both ears angled forward and slightly inward. Not approval, not disapproval. Assessment. It was evaluating my footwork. That was the thing I had been slowly accepting over the past 12 hours. The hare was smart. Not trained animal smart, actually smart. The ledge position was strategic. The evaluation posture was diagnostic. When I'd bumped a wall loudly in the right tunnel and drawn 2 extra moss slugs, it had made a small sound, precision hearing rendered as something between a click and a sigh, a creature that had witnessed something below its expectations. I was being graded. The problem was, I did not know what the test was. I went back to the drill. After 10 minutes, the hare moved forward into my 2-meter radius, trekking my blade hand, eyes following each cut. So, I tried something. On the next sequence, I placed the final blade position on a line that would have connected if the hare stayed where it was. No threat in the motion, just the line. The hare relocated 3 inches left with no visible preparation. 1 moment there, next moment 3 inches left, no in between. I stopped the drill. The hair looked at me. Looked at the space where it had been. Looked at me again. The expression of a creature that had just demonstrated something and was waiting to see if the recipient understood what had been demonstrated. Fate dodge, I would learn later. The hair's signature ability. Not speed. Not reflexes. The capacity to read the most probable outcome in the immediate future and reposition to avoid it before it happened. It was not moving in response to my blade. It had moved in response to where my blade was going to be, decided in the fraction of a second when the arc was set, before I completed the motion. You want to fight? I said. The hair blinked. You brought me here. You watched me train for 12 hours. You demonstrated your best ability. You want me to come after you. One ear angled back. Not retreat, consideration. I looked at the phone, level 14. It was level 19, a 5-level gap and a gap in type of abilities that I did not know how to quantify yet. Not tonight, I said. I want to know more about you before I try to catch you in the dark. The hair gave me the slow blink. Then it went back to the ledge, jumped up without apparent effort, and curled into a position that looked like sleep but had its ears indexed toward the right tunnel. Monitoring. While appearing to rest, I sat against my wall and ran through what I knew of the hair, the teleport-style dodge, the deliberate navigation, the way it communicated entirely through positioning. And one more item. It had brought me to this cave, which meant it knew the cave existed, which meant there was a reason it had been here before, and there was still that filled wall in the 4th room. I filed that and put 4 more hours against the right tunnel before the next sleep cycle. By the time I woke again, I was level 16. The hair had moved to the floor, 3 feet from where I'd been sleeping, watching. Good morning, I said. It angled one ear forward. I ate, checked the timeline, 47 hours, 3 minutes. Level 16 in under 24 hours from level 1. Extrapolation put me at level 25 minimum by the deadline. They were on their timeline. I was on mine. The hair stood up, stretched in a way that was not relaxed, more like a pre-combat engagement check, and hopped to the center of the chamber floor. It looked at me with a directional attention that meant, initiate. Now? I said. It blinked once. I stood up. Here is the thing about trying to catch something that can see 4 seconds into the future. You cannot chase it. I learned this in the first 30 seconds. The moon hair moved the moment I committed to a direction, before the motion completed, before I'd even fully decided on it. I flash-stepped twice in the opening exchange, which accomplished nothing. It was not running from me. It was solving me. Every dodge surgical, the minimum required, nothing wasted. It was evaluating how I responded to failure. I stopped chasing, stood still. Let the hair pace the chamber's edge while I thought. What beats perfect reactive positioning? Not speed. It was faster than me, and would always be faster than me. Not reflexes. Its fate dodge operated before physical responses were even triggered. The only thing that beats a perfect read on your opponent's movement is not having movement to read. I sat down. Cross-legged, on the chamber floor. Blade on the ground beside me, both hands visible and open. The moon hair stopped pacing. I did not look at it directly. I looked at a point about 3 feet to its left, which is the non-threatening attention gaze. Not avoidance, not aggression, just the middle register that says I am aware of you but not directing anything at you. The hair's ears went from back alert to forward curious. A micro-shift. Pac-Mind Reading gave me something from it. Not words, not a thought, but an emotional vector. Curiosity. A recalibration happening. Something that translated as, this is different from the expected behavior pattern. I waited. The hair moved. 1 step. 2. Stopping each time to assess my non-response. Coming closer the way water comes in when you stop pushing it. Not rushing, just filling the space that resistance had been vacating. At about 2 meters, it stopped again. I could read its body state through creature awareness, weight evenly distributed, no tension in the rear haunches that would precede a launch, ears at neutral forward. Not about to bolt, deciding something. I held very still. Silence walk was running passively, no sound from my breathing or the small involuntary physical adjustments a human body makes when holding a position. To the hair's senses, I was approximately as present as the stone walls. Its fate dodge, I reasoned, was a read on active intentions. On movement decisions. On the vector of an incoming action. If I had no incoming action, if my only intention was to remain still, the fate dodge had nothing to predict. Stillness was outside its operational parameters. 1 more step, then another. And then the moon hair was at 1 meter within reach, its nose working at the air near my extended hand, and I had 2 choices. The first, close my hand. A normal fast grab had maybe a 40% chance of working. The second, don't. Bond through conquest was the mechanism. The hair had to be subdued, but the bond was voluntary. The conquest was the prerequisite, not the bond. Which meant it had to choose even after being caught. If I grabbed it now, I might fulfill the condition, and teach it I was the kind of tamer who grabbed first and asked later. Which was exactly how the kingdom's contract system worked, and exactly what I'd been marked as an alternative to. I stayed still. The moon hair touched my hand with its nose. Light, brief, diagnostic. Then it did something I had not predicted. It sat down on the back of my open hand, with its full weight, not much weight, a rabbit, but deliberate and settled. Pack mind reading was not designed for the emotional resolution of a rare class beast making a relationship decision, but what it gave me in that moment was a closing, the finalization of a calculation. The specific quality of a decision being registered as complete. Familiar bond, initiated. Moon hair, rare, level 918, elects voluntary. Reincarnation. Reincarnating? The hair dissolved upward from its physical form in silver blue light, not painfully, not dramatically, more like a controlled transition between states. The light compressed, reorganized, and settled into an orbit around my left shoulder. Not visible, not exactly, but present the way a sound is present after it stops. A resonance, a warmth, a definite there-ness. Then 2 notifications, back to back. Familiar skill. Transfer, flash step, stabilized. Upgraded, familiar skill transfer, fate dodge, acquired. The flash step I already had, but the bonded version was cleaner, the blink's spatial awareness sharpened, the range extended. Fate dodge settled into my awareness like a new kind of weather. I didn't need to test it. I could feel it running. A soft, constant reading of the most probable next seconds, a quiet voice that said, not quite right about certain positions before I'd reasoned through why. Current level, 19. The bond had carried a synchronization bonus. My base level was still 16, the ceiling 19 while the bond was new. For now, level 19, fate dodge active, flash step upgraded. I looked at my open hand. Empty, but not. Good, I said. The warmth at my shoulder shifted, a positional adjustment, the hair settling in. The faintest pull of something that translated as, finally. I stood up. Check the timeline, 44 hours, 31 minutes. Deep in the right tunnel, at the edge of precision hearing's range, something was moving that hadn't moved in the 4 hours I had mapped that section. Heavy. Slow. Deliberate. Very, very large. I reached for the blade. Fate dodge was not a reflex. It said something different, in 0.8 of a second, given the configuration of the space. The most probable event is contact on your left from that direction. Adjust now, before it's set in motion. The origin didn't matter. Attack, falling stone, thrown object. The limitation was real. Genuinely unpredictable events had no physical antecedent in the window and could still hit me. But 0.8 of a second was longer than any trained martial reflex, and it expanded with level. I was thinking about this while moving through the right tunnel toward whatever was making the slow, heavy sound deeper in the cave, because thinking through capability limits was more useful than thinking about the sound. The sound had a pattern. Long pause, roughly 12 seconds. Then a single heavy ground contact, like something shifting weight. Either something enormous moving very slowly, or something that moved in the 12-second gaps and stopped to listen. Stopped to listen meant auditory senses it was relying on, which meant silence walk was my primary tool for getting close enough to assess before it knew I was there. The right tunnel ended at a natural archway opening into a chamber about twice the size of the main cave, ceiling higher, 3, maybe 4 meters. Floor rougher, bare rock that had cracked and resettled over what looked like geological time. Blue torches here too, but fewer, and one was dark. In the center of the chamber, occupying roughly the floor space of a sedan car, stood the cave ogre. It was crouched on its haunches with the weight-forward distribution of a body too large to stand upright comfortably in the ceiling height. One enormous forearm resting on the ground, its head, broad, flat, mossy gray skin with ochre tusks that curved outward rather than upward, angled toward the tunnel I had just come through. It was listening. Silence walk meant it wasn't hearing me. Creature awareness gave me its behavioral state through physical disposition, alert but not alarmed. Something had registered, it was waiting to confirm rather than responding to a confirmed threat. The phone gave me a classification tag, CAEG Argry, Boss Class, Level 27, Territorial Variant. EXP, Exiled, Standard, 2400. Combat Threat, Hiji. Recommend, Advanced Party, Level 27. I was 19. A recommended party fight, solo, at 8 levels below. The 100 times multiplier on 2400 base EXP was 240,000. I stared at that number. At current scaling, 2,000 to 3,000 EXP per level, the Cave Ogre restructured my timeline significantly if I could manage it. I backed up 3 full chambers and sat down to think. The Ogre was 8 levels above me with a boss class designation, enhanced durability probably, damage thresholds that made light attacks ineffective, possibly a special combat mechanic the tooltip had declined to elaborate on. The recommend advanced party tag meant a solo fighter at a similar level had a reasonable chance. 8 levels below was a different category. What I had going for me, fate dodge to preempt hits, flash step to reposition instantly, terrain reading for perfect positional data on every cracked section of floor, silence walk to control whether it knew where I was, and creature awareness for its behavioral state. I went back to the archway entrance, stopped, used silence walk, and watched the ogre for 45 minutes. The patrol was a figure-8 route through the chamber, approximately 12 minutes per full cycle. Listening checks at the 2 crossover points. Primary weapon. A stone club about 2/3 its body length, dragged rather than carried. It picked the club up at the start of each circuit and set it down at the start of the next, which meant a 12-second window per cycle where the club was not in its hand. The ceiling. The ceiling was the thing. The ogre couldn't fully stand upright without its head getting within about half a meter of the ceiling, which meant any attack sequence requiring upward momentum was compromised. The club arced outward and low, not upward. There were 2 load-bearing columns in the chamber, old root-wrapped stone columns close enough to the ceiling that the gap was maybe a foot. The ogre's club couldn't arc into that gap cleanly. Terrain reading had also mapped 4 unstable floor sections where the subsurface was cracked and would shift under load. The ogre's patrol crossed 2, mine could avoid all 4. I made a plan. Not a comfortable one, it required things going correctly in sequence. But it was a plan, and I had 44 hours and an ogre sitting on 240,000 EXP. It was also guarding the tunnel to whatever was behind the filled wall. That mattered more than the EXP. I went back to the main chamber, ate, slept for 3 hours, and came back with a cleaner head. The moonhair was with me, not in visible form, the resonance at my shoulder, the secondary awareness. I checked my skills, and stopped at one I hadn't consciously accepted. BATL pattern analysis, passive, recently acquired. 45 minutes of systematic combat observation of a boss-class creature, while holding weak point reading from the crawler fights, had triggered an environmental amplification. WEAK. Point reading KAS, WEAPT. WAS amplified. Passive combat layer. Tooltip. Identifies and continuously updates the attack pattern logic of any creature in active observation or combat engagement, not prediction, analysis. Real-time sequencing of attack cycles, cooldowns, preferred movement responses to specific stimuli. It was already running on the ogre. I had a live analysis of its attack cycle, its club arc timing, its response patterns to sound, movement, and light, and a projected behavioral tree for what it would do if I entered the chamber from the archway versus the left tunnel branch versus the right. I did not have to guess the ogre anymore, I knew it. The hair's warmth at my shoulders shifted, the approval shift. Okay, I said. I moved to the archway. I went in wrong the first time. I entered from the archway with silence walk active, got within 12 meters of the ogre at the club down point of its cycle, and flash steps to the column I'd identified as primary cover. The column covered my upward exposure. The ceiling was close, the ogre's club arc was blocked. What I had not accounted for, the flash step displacement even under silence walk, created a subtle pressure change in the air. The rapid displacement of a body from one point to another generates a small air event, not sound, but movement, and the ogre was a creature that had been in this enclosed cave long enough to know what normal air pressure felt like. It turned immediately. Not toward the column. Toward the archway, where I had come from. Battle pattern analysis told me it was running a search protocol, sound source at threshold, check entry point first, expand outward. I had 6 seconds before it expanded the check to the column. I flash stepped back out through the archway and retreated into the tunnel. The ogre checked the archway, found nothing. Stood at the entrance for 2 minutes, longer than any part of its established patrol cycle, and then went back to the figure 8. I sat in the tunnel and thought about what I'd learned. Flash step produced an air event, and in an enclosed space a creature with territorial awareness would detect it. So flash step was a reposition tool inside engagements, not an approach tool. I needed to be already in position before the engagement started, on foot, fully silence walk. Scent was a separate problem. The main current ran from the right tunnel toward the archway, but thermal currents were air currents. A gentle directional controlled ember, held correctly, would draw the ambient air one way, pulling my scent away from the ogre's patrol path. It took about an hour to test the heat redirect and map where to place the ember point. The position was the left column, the one I'd been planning to use anyway. I made the second approach. 50 minutes of silence. Walked through the archway, around the edge of the chamber, staying within the thermal draw. The ogre completed 2 full circuits while I moved. Battle pattern analysis tracked both and updated the timing data in real time. I reached the column at the 4-minute mark of the 3rd circuit, well before the ogre's next patrol crossover. I was in position. The ogre was 8 meters away, mid-circuit, dragging the club. I waited for the crossover point where it set the club down. The club went down. 12-second window. I ran. Not a flash step. A real run, committed, crossing the distance at human sprint speed, and brought the blade down in a full force strike on the exposed joint between the ogre's shoulder and neck. The spot battle pattern analysis had flagged as the lowest armor density point on the body. The blade connected. I had a good blade. It was not a great blade. Against mossy gray ogre skin at level 27, it cut to about 4 centimeters and stopped. The ogre made a sound I felt in my sternum. I flash stepped to the column before the club came back up. Damage dealt. EIGH 147 smaller than I needed. The ogre had registered that strike the way you register a splinter in your palm. Real, irritating, not relevant to anything structural. But its attack response was exactly what battle pattern analysis had projected. It turned to the strike point, swept at chest height twice through the space where I'd been, then checked the archway and the right tunnel entrance. It did not check the columns. That was the data I needed. A creature whose threat model didn't include something hiding behind a pillar and striking into its patrol path. An exploitable gap. I waited behind the column through 2 circuits, until its alert state slowed back to standard timing. The hair's warmth at my shoulder shifted, not the approval shift. The one I read as attention directed outward, toward the environment rather than at me. I ran precision hearing at full range. The ceiling above the ogre's 4th circuit crossover point had a loose section. The sound signature, hollow, slightly resonant, meant more than cracked, a natural flaw in the rock, and the ogre's patrol vibration had been working on it for years. At the 4th circuit crossover, if the vibration was right, it was load-bearing enough to drop material, not enough to kill it. But enough to stagger it, and in the stagger window, I could hit the knee. The back of the ogre's left knee was the next lowest armor density point. Battle pattern analysis had mapped from the first strike and subsequent observation. A full force blade strike on a staggered target could affect the structural joint. I looked at the ceiling section. I looked at controlled ember. Stone under sustained directional heat, at a point where it was already cracked and bearing load. I did not have the engineering background to calculate this precisely. I had the practical sense to understand that heat and load on a stressed stone joint did not improve the joint's structural integrity. I began. It took 11 minutes for the ceiling section to give, not a collapse, a controlled fracture. The stone above the 4th circuit crossover cracked in a pattern that battle pattern analysis had modeled in the final few minutes, updating the projection as controlled ember worked and the load shifted. When it came down, it came as 3 large sections and a cascade of smaller fragments. The primary section caught the ogre across the left shoulder and crown. The ogre dropped to one knee. I was already moving. Flash step from the column to the ogre's right side. Fate dodge gave me the 2-second warning that the club arm was coming up defensively, and I adjusted. Went under it, inside its arc radius, 1 meter from the torso, where the club couldn't reach without the ogre hitting its own body. The ogre dropped the club and used its free hand as a blunt instrument instead. I took the hit. Fate dodge could have routed me clear, but that would have cost the inside radius position, and I wasn't giving it up. I intercepted with my left forearm. The impact drove me back 2 steps and lit up my arm, full restoration already addressing it. The moon hair was not in physical form, resonant, integrated, but in the moment I took the impact I felt. Fate dodge recalibrate, narrower prediction window, higher precision, a mode shift I did not have a name for. Combat mode, fate dodge. The familiar bond had more to give. The ogre tried a body pivot to get its weight onto me. Combat mode, fate dodge set left, and I went left, and the ogre's weight came down on air where I had been. It overbalanced. The knee it had been keeping elevated came down to stabilize. Left knee. Down. I had 1 second. Full force blade strike, maximum weight behind it, on the back of the left knee joint of a staggered, weight-committed, partially under rubble boss-class ogre. The blade went in 3 centimeters past where it had reached on the shoulder. The joint was not armored the same way. A flex point, a crease in the defensive structure, and I had aimed for the exact gap battle pattern analysis had been updating since the first strike. The ogre made a sound that vibrated the remaining ceiling sections. I flash stepped to the archway. The ogre stood up. That was the thing I had not entirely accounted for. It stood up. The left knee was compromised. Battle pattern analysis was reading a movement penalty, an uneven weight distribution that affected its club arc angle. It was damaged. It was not down. It found me at the archway immediately. Alert state, maximum. Search protocol, suspended. I was confirmed. It charged. The charging ogre moved faster than I expected. The low ceiling forced a forward weight posture that turned the stride into something between a run and a controlled fall. I flash stepped to the left column. Its momentum carried it to the archway's edge before it recovered, and I used the 3 seconds to run the assessment. Left knee, about 30% movement penalty. I needed to hit it again, but I'd burned both one-time resources, ceiling drop, and charge overbalance. What was left was its attack pattern. Battle pattern analysis had the combat mode sequence: club swing, step, club swing, pivot check, club swing, step. A 3-beat cycle with a consistent pause at the pivot check, about 1.2 seconds. 1.2 seconds, longer than Fate Dodge's 0.8-second window. At the pivot check, the ogre's weight transitioned right foot to left, loading the compromised knee fully. That was my window. Flash step inside its right side and hit the knee joint from the outside this time. Different angle, same point. The ogre came toward the column. First swing, I stayed behind it. Second swing connected with the column stone, juddering the floor. Terrain reading confirmed the column would hold. Third beat. Pivot check. Flash step. Inside the right. Blade. Full force. Left knee joint, outside angle. The blade went in 4 centimeters past the previous strike point. The ogre went down. Immediately. The left knee had no margin left, and the new strike took what remained, and the creature's weight came down in a controlled collapse that the ogre tried to break with both arms and almost managed. It was down on both forearms, one knee destroyed, and it turned its head toward me with the look of a creature recalibrating what it had thought it was dealing with. Moonhair's warmth. The combat mode, fate dodge. And something else. A reading from Pac-Mind reading that did not translate cleanly because the ogre was solo, not a group, but gave me a behavioral vector that read as, acknowledging. A creature that acknowledged was a creature that had stopped fighting and started evaluating. I stayed at distance. Did not approach, did not press the advantage. The ogre held that position for 6 seconds. Then it lowered its head the rest of the way to the floor. Cave Ogre defeated. XP gained 240,000. Level up. Multiple calculating. Current level 20 IJ8. Titan stamina transferred automatically. The skill that had been in the pending queue, finally unlocked by the defeating a physical superior in sustained combat trigger condition. Titan stamina, A amplified, passive. Recovery rate, continuous. Physical exertion limit, significantly expanded. Damage threshold, elevated. I sat down against the column because my legs had decided to register what the last 2 hours had asked of them. Level 28. The class, by my estimate, somewhere between 8 and 14. I ate a ration and breathed for a while. The ogre was still breathing. It hadn't died. It had yielded. The behavioral vector read giving me not aggression but wait and see. I left it there. Instead, I went back through the ogre's chamber, down the continuation of the right tunnel, toward the 4th room with the filled wall, and toward whatever was warm behind it. The 4th room. I had been here before, briefly, in the initial mapping session before I understood what I was dealing with. Small room. Dead end, or what had appeared to be a dead end. The carved floor markings continued in here, same beast relief style as the main chamber, but denser, as if more information had needed to fit in less space. The wall I had marked was on the north face. About 2 meters wide and floor to ceiling. Up close, battle pattern analysis ran on the structural environment as readily as on a creature. The filled section was clear. The original wall was old stone, the fill was newer, decades maybe, not centuries. Someone had sealed this wall within living memory, with good mortar and well-cut stone. Deliberate and resourced. They hadn't wanted whatever was behind it to get out, or to be found. And the cave ogre's territory started 1 chamber back. A boss-class creature at the exact junction wasn't an accident, it was placement. I worked controlled ember into the mortar joints while levering the edges with the blade. Good mortar under sustained heat and lever stress has a yield point. I found it at minute 18. 4 sections came free, and the opening was large enough to enter. I went through. The chamber on the other side was smaller than I expected. Roughly circular, 5 meters across, lower ceiling, blue torches, fewer than the main cave, and one flickering in a way none of the others had. Not dying. Agitated. The floor center had been worked. A circular depression, about 2 meters across, with 7 iron stakes driven deep into the stone at measured intervals around the perimeter. Each one connected to a chain, fine link work, the kind made when strength was secondary to precision. The chains ran inward to a center point, where a fox was sitting. Silver lavender fur. Thin, elegant frame, built for speed over mass. At the base of its tail, the fur gave way to something that was not quite fur and not quite flame, a translucent structure like a glass lantern, warm amber gold light within it, the same agitated flicker as the unstable torch. It sat with the chains running taut to points on its body. Collar, 2 wrist points, 2 Hindlegate points. And it watched me come through the gap in the wall with the expression of a creature that had been expecting someone for a long time and was now doing the math on whether I was the right one. The phone, silver lantern fox rare, level 31, suppressed. Bond eligible. Conditional. Not yes, like the moonhair. Conditional. The fox opened its mouth. It spoke. Not in any language I knew. The words were not words from Japanese or anything in my experience. But they arrived with meaning intact, the way a smell arrives with information. I did not translate, I simply understood. It said, "What do you want from freedom?" Not the vague rhetorical kind. The specific kind, real answer expected, actual assessment happening, criterion unstated. I looked at the stakes. At the chains running from iron to amber and silver coat. At the lantern tail pulsing with the agitation of something that had been still for too long. I want to understand why it works the way it works, I said. The kingdom system, the beasts, all of it, before I have to fight in it. I want to know what it actually is before I'm told what it should be. The fox looked at me for 4 full seconds. The lantern tail's flicker steadied slightly. Then it said, "That's close enough." It told me the stakes could be removed. anchored by the intention of whoever had placed them, and my intention was different. If you pull them, it said, they release. And if I don't, I said, then you leave, it said, and nothing changes, and I stay here until the chains finish the work they were started on. What are they finishing? Erasure, it said. The slow kind. Long enough that when it's done, nothing remains to bond or to remember. I pulled the first stake. The iron came out of the stone with a sound like something being unclenched, not violent, almost the opposite, a resolution. The chain connected to it went slack. The fox's right foreleg lifted fractionally. I went around the circle. All 7. The last one resisted for a moment, and then it came out, and all the chains fell away, and the fox stood in the center of the depression and stretched from nose to lantern tip in a single full-body extension that took about 5 seconds and looked like it cost the fox nothing and gave it everything. It did not thank me. I had not pulled the stakes to be thanked. I had pulled them because they were wrong, and the wrongness was clear, and no other variable was relevant. The fox walked to the edge of the depression and sat. Lantern tail steady now, clean, warm amber. It said, "You have new sight coming. Are you ready to receive it?" I said yes. I did not know what it meant, and I said yes anyway. The fox pressed the tip of its lantern tail to my temple. The contact lasted about 2 seconds. And then I could see. The fox's tail was still against my temple. Then it told me to look. Not more light. That was the first thing, it was not more light. The room looked the same, the torches were in the same positions. The stone was the same stone. Nothing my eyes reported changed. What changed was a layer underneath the visual. An overlay, the way a watermark runs under printed text. And in that layer, the chains were visible, not the chains on the floor. Those were still there, physical, slack. The chains I could now see ran through the walls, through the floor, through the ceiling. Fine link royal script chains running through the stone like veins. A network I had walked through for 24 hours without any awareness of their existence. I traced them. They converged here, lines from the main chamber, the right tunnel, and a direction I mapped as north-northeast, but they originated somewhere above. The castle direction. I looked at the fox. These are royal chains. They are the primary suppression network, it said. The same architecture that dampened your system. This cave is a node in it, one of the older ones. After someone decided they needed to keep things down here. After someone decided they needed to keep things down here, the fox said, and quiet, and classified as storage. The kingdom's chains ran straight through the beast relief carvings, intersecting the images rather than carved around them, installed with no regard for what was already there. The fox said, the kingdom's summoning system does not bond with beasts, it suppresses them. What the herald called a covenant is a suppression architecture sophisticated enough that the beast inside it can move, can develop, can feel something that resembles loyalty. But the covenant is not mutual. The beast cannot leave or refuse instruction at the core level. A complete behavioral cage, very well made. I thought about Daiki's Stormwolf, the way it had come through the split in the veil. The sound the veil had made when it sealed behind. Daiki doesn't know, I said. The air summoner rarely does. The system works. The beast performs. The bond feels real because the cage is designed to allow the behavioral range of a real bond within its constraints. What the air cannot perceive is the constraint itself. But the beast knows. The fox's lantern tail pulsed once. The beast always knows. I thought about Daiki pressing his hand to the Stormwolf's jaw while lightning ran through his arm, and the wolf pressing back, and whether that press was willing or compliant. My system doesn't work that way, I said. Your system is older than the kingdom's, the fox said. Much older. It predates the suppression architecture by 800 years. The kingdom built its own system in part to counter it, because a bond a beast chose could not be inherited, transferred, or owned, only partnered with. That distinction matters enormously to a power structure that runs on inheritable beast contracts. Saw lantern vision, gift transferred. The notification arrived confirming what the fox's tail had already given me. The skill settled into my system not as an amplified common skill but as a straight transfer. A rare class ability moved from a rare class beast to a human recipient through a mechanism the system categorized as gift, voluntary, irrevocable. Saw lantern vision rare, passive, enables the bearer to perceive suppression structures, covenant chains, and beast binding architecture overlaid on the physical environment. Cannot be blocked by concealment abilities below rare class. I looked at the walls again through the layer. The chains ran north-northeast toward the castle, but the main suppression line, heaviest and densest, ran in a different direction. Deeper into the cave. Downward. What's at the end of that? I said, not as a question. The oldest thing in this cave, the fox said. The reason the cave exists. The reason the kingdom installed all of this. Tell me, I said. Tempest Fenrir, it said. The ancestor lineage of every Stormwolf covenant currently operating in the kingdom. The root that the entire Stormwolf contract system was grafted onto 800 years ago. The entity that made the kingdom's most powerful beast line possible, and that the kingdom immediately sealed afterward, because a root that's still alive can grow in directions the grafted branches weren't designed for. I thought about this. And Daki's Stormwolf, I said carefully, carries a fraction of Fenrir's bloodline in every cell, as do all Stormwolves in the kingdom's stable. The bond that Fenrir could offer, if it were free, would outclassify the covenant bond between any Stormwolf and any summoner in this kingdom by a margin I don't have the right comparison for. I looked at the chain lines running deeper into the cave and checked the timeline. 38 hours, 42 minutes. Thank you, I said to the fox. Don't free it the way you freed me, it said. Fenrir cannot be freed. It can only be convinced. I filed that. And I went deeper. The corridor toward the lower level was precise, dimensions exact, torches steadier than any in the main cave. The wall chains grew denser every 20 meters, link work going fine cut to heavy forged, the royal crests shifting from the current dynasty's emblem to something older. At the end of the corridor, a sealed door. I opened it. The chamber on the other side was enormous. The ceiling was high enough that the torches at the walls did not illuminate it. In the center, Tempest Fenrir, Storm Grey, its coat layered in the way of geological time, not animal growth. From every point of its body, electric cyan arcs ran in continuous crackling lines without discharging on the floor. 16 chain anchors held it from the walls, the bronze-red glow on them the color of sustained load. The chains were old. Fenrir's eyes opened. White, fully, rim to rim. They tracked to me and to the soul lantern vision layer I was reading the chamber through. It did not move. I stood in the doorway and looked at it for a long moment, and it looked back. I said, I know what you are. The wide eyes tracked the words. Then I backed out and closed the door. I'd reached it by a maintenance path the kingdom didn't know about, bypassing the gauntlet on the direct route. But a shortcut I'd stolen wasn't the same as a road I'd earned, and Fenrir would know the difference. I went back to where soul lantern vision showed the gauntlet's beginning and walked toward the thread bridge. The torches were all active. The thread bridge was about 300 meters down the gauntlet corridor. I knew it was there before I could see it. Precision hearing resolved the drop in ambient pressure and the high fine vibration of threads under tension before the corridor ended. The corridor ended at an archway, and through it, the chasm. About 15 meters wide, its bottom filled with a chain suppression field that blocked any visual read. The bridge spanning it was web thread fine as tensioned piano wire, parallel lines forming the surface, uprights and a handrail on each side. It looked decorative and was probably the opposite. I tested the near end with 1 foot. It took the weight without flex, stable from tension rather than mass. I started across. Creature awareness reached 10 meters in all directions. In the open chasm space, that radius extended below me as well as to the sides. For the first 30 seconds, nothing. Then, movement from the chasm walls. Shadow class constructs, the phone tagged them, not living, built from the chain suppression architecture into compact mobile forms that adhered to the walls and launched from them. Dog-sized, fast. 4 of them, 2 from each wall. I had 3 meters of thread surface on each side, not enough for lateral movement, and the far archway held the royal thread guardian I wasn't ready for. I stayed on the bridge. Fate dodge ran at combat mode. The first construct came at chest height from the left. I dropped to one knee and I grabbed the underside of the bridge instead. The second I dodged left. The third went for the underside to join the first. The fourth came high for the back of my head while my attention was on the others. Fate dodge said, flat. I went flat, and it passed 2 inches over my spine. Prone on a web thread bridge, 4 constructs repositioned around me, 300 meters ahead. Terrain reading gave me the thread surface's stress map. It had nodes, points where tensile load concentrated between uprights, and at a node a flash step carried the thread's own tension as launch assist. Node to node, 15 meters a step, the remaining 200 meters became 14 jumps. I got up under silence walk and started. By jump 3 the constructs had repositioned to the thread surface ahead, barrier, not ambush. At jump 8 2 stood at nodes 10 and 12. A third running to intercept at 9. I stopped and directed controlled ember forward. The constructs ran on a coherence frequency heat affected, and at node 9, the tension assist the runner was calibrated for wasn't there. It overjumped, landed past the node on unstable thread, and lost footing. I flash stepped past while it reoriented. The last 2 were 1 exchange behind, battle pattern analysis running on them the way it had on the ogre, and I reached the far archway at the 14th jump. Through the arch, a room. Small, square stone, 1 occupant. The royal thread guardian was humanoid in shape, which surprised me, a shaped figure, 2 meters tall, built from chain suppression material into a form that was recognizably a person, the way a paper cutout is, flat, defined in outline but not in depth. Where a face would be, a blank surface with a royal crest embossed on it. It turned toward me as I entered. No voice, no announcement. A chain extended from its right hand and reached for me, not a weapon. A binding attempt, installing a covenant chain on me, the same way the kingdom's summoning system bound beasts. I felt it reach my wrist and find nothing to bind to. The Guardian paused. Tried again. Found nothing. Asovirican Chainbreaker. Skill acquisition. Triggered. Environmental acquisition. Not a source skill. The experience of having a covenant binding attempt fail in a space where chain suppression architecture was dense enough to be its own source had triggered amplification from baseline. Ambient. Skill sourced. Seal cut ritual. Uncommon. Amplifying. R. Sovereign Chainbreaker Authority Class. Targeted severance of any chain, bond, covenant, or suppression structure below legendary class. Not destruction, severance of authority. The chain remains, but its claim does not. I took the chain the Guardian had extended and severed its authority at the source point. The chain fell. Still physical, no longer a covenant instrument. The Guardian looked at it, target resisted covenant installation and authorized covenant infrastructure. Status, unprecedented. No protocol. Soul Lantern vision showed the covenant connection ran back through the Guardian itself. It wasn't just a construct, it was a covenant anchor maintaining a section of the Gauntlet's network. Sovereign Chainbreaker was severance of authority, not destruction. I severed its anchor. The royal crest dimmed. Its form redistributed rather than collapsed, the chain material flowing out of the human shape into the floor and walls, back to the general network. The material remained, the authority that had shaped it into a purpose was dissolved. Void-line footwork settled into my system in the aftermath. Another environmental acquisition, from the Threadbridge navigation itself, from moving through a three-dimensional space using tension physics and terrain readings simultaneously. The system had built the amplified version from the experience itself. Vitaligned footwork movement, spatial, full three-dimensional spatial awareness in close quarters. Passive. The bearer perceives the volumetric geometry of any enclosed or defined space as precisely as ground footing. I walked through where the Guardian had been. Ahead, the storm gate. The storm gate spanned the full corridor width ahead, 2 stone columns with a crossbeam between them, blue-white lightning running in continuous arcs through the gate space. Not an atmospheric electrical field. A woven grid of persistent strands, each one tracking. Soul Lantern vision showed the structure immediately. The gate wasn't generating its own output. A sealed core at the crossbeam's center held a covenant chain convergence, a bound entity contained within the crossbeam, its output directed outward as the barrier. The Stormgate Warden, elemental sealed level 34. Not a beast, not a construct. An entity the kingdom had found and enclosed, not created. The chain convergence point was inside the lightning grid. To use Sovereign Chainbreaker on the Warden's anchor, I had to get inside the gate. Storm Aegis would be the answer, and I didn't have it yet. Void-lined footwork gave me a three-dimensional map of the gate space. The arcs weren't static. Each had a 0.3-second drift cycle, and a vertical column of 6 adjacent pairs reached their drift windows in sequence, top to bottom, a 1.8-second cascade. Enough. If I moved continuously and read each window right, I set Silence Walk and Fate Dodge and moved. First pair cleared, second cleared, third drifted closed faster than average. Fate Dodge said left lean, and the arc grazed my right arm. Contact. Even a graze from a sealed elemental's full output arc was significant. My right arm lit up wrist to shoulder, Titan stamina processing the load rather than blocking it. Environmental. Acquisition triggered, storm contact. I didn't stop. Fourth, fifth, sixth pair through the remaining 0.9 seconds, the charge now an additional timing signal, the arc positions readable as thermal pressure. Inside the gate. Storm AEGIS. Amplifying, Storm AEGIS. AGIS Advanced. Storm Contact Common Environmental Passive. Storm AEGIS converts incoming electrical contact to stored charge. Stored charge may be directed as supplemental output, absorbed as stamina recovery, or discharged as controlled burst. The charge in my right arm went from damage event to resource in 2 seconds. I reached up to the crossbeam and found the main anchor in the Soul Lantern vision layer, the chain holding the Warden inside the mechanism and directing its output outward. I severed it. The lightning grid went momentarily chaotic as the Warden's output scattered in all directions. Storm Aegis absorbed everything that came at me. Then the Warden's output stopped, not because it was gone, because it had chosen to stop. The crossbeam went silent. Soul Lantern vision tracked the dissipation. The Warden released its output upward through the cave ceiling and into the air above the forest. Gone. Not dead. Released. Storm Aegis tagged its stored charge, 34% capacity. Usable. I walked through where the gate had been. The 7-chain gauntlet was purpose-built, 7 sequential Guardian constructs, each holding a chain anchor in the suppression network, each activated by the passage of the previous. The phone classified them: Chain Sentinel, Gauntlet Variant, level 22 to 26, escalating. Relay activation: each Sentinel wakes the next at 75% capacity. Sequential engagement designed as party challenge. For me, solo, it was a timing problem. Pace each engagement so the Sentinel reaches 75% damage exactly as I transition to the next. Too fast, and the next one activates early. too slow, and I'm fighting two at once. The Moonhair's fate dodge ran the cascade logic on all 7 engagements simultaneously and returned the result as a rhythm. A felt sense of the pacing the gauntlet wanted. I walked in. Sentinel 1 activated, level 22 chain lash pattern. I flash stepped past the lash, severed the Covenant anchor on its back with Sovereign Chainbreaker, and at 75% capacity Sentinel 2 woke. I left one degrading and moved on. The pattern held through 5, each anchor severed at the right moment, each transition clean. On 4-1, I took a chain lash that Storm Aegis partly absorbed. The constructs ran close enough to the gate's frequency for partial intake, and full restoration handled the rest. 6 was the complication, dual anchor, and the relay from 5 was faster, so I was inside 6 with 5 still coherent behind me. First anchor severed, then 5's degrading final lash came at the back of my knee, and fate dodge routed me forward 2 steps, putting me exactly at 6's second anchor, both severed in the same second. Sentinel 7 was the heaviest, 2 anchor extensions fixing it to the walls, its anchor points buried inside the central mass. Storm Aegis was carrying 67% charge from the whole gauntlet, 1 full burst. I discharged it into the anchor convergence. The chain link broke at the structural level, and the construct fell apart into inert matter. 7 chain gauntlet complete. The 7 anchors released their stored load simultaneously, suppression charge dispersing into the cave structure. The corridor went quiet, the phone, level 34. Each Sentinel had counted individually, and the Sovereign Chain severances had triggered an environmental acquisition bonus. Faust status Veal 40C. Acquired. Gauntlet completion bonus. Falls status, Vile L Deception class. Passive, Bearer's visible status information level, ability classification, Beast Bond registry, presents as unregistered or below threshold to external scanning systems. To any kingdom scanner I would read as unclassified, no level. No beasts, just a person. Just the Beastless Summoner. Level 34. 17 abilities, including Storm Aegis, False Status Veil, and Sovereign Chainbreaker. The Moonhair's warmth at my shoulder held steady. I checked the timeline, 28 hours 17 minutes. Ahead, the corridor to Fenrir's chamber. I walked forward. I stood outside the door to Fenrir's chamber for 6 minutes. Not because I was afraid. Because I wanted to be exactly right about the state I was in before I went through. Physical condition, level 34, Titan stamina running, no active injuries, Storm Aegis at 0 charge after Sentinel 7. The Hair's bond stable, combat mode fate dodge at full precision. What I knew of Fenrir was thin, intelligent, chains that didn't fully restrain it, environmental electrical output, and no combat data. Everything else in this cave I had been able to pattern. Territorial instinct, programmed response sets. Fenrir was a strategic intelligence that had been alive for centuries in a sealed chamber with nothing to do but think about what it was. I had 17 abilities and, level 34, and a moon hair. Fenrir had 800 years. I opened the door. The chamber was exactly as I had left it. Fenrir at the center, chains running from 16 anchor points across its body to the walls, wide eyes open. Following me from the door, I walked to approximately 15 meters from it and stopped. The chamber's ambient electrical charge hit Storm Aegis immediately, absorption function running continuously even at 0 charge. Part of my attention would always be on the charge state. Fenrir watched me stand at 15 meters for 4 seconds, then it moved the arm length the chains allowed and sent a single lightning arc at the wall to my left. Not at me, at the wall. The stone smoked and cracked and a section fell inward. A demonstration. The same one I had seen before. Followed immediately by the second, Fenrir launched, not at me, at the space I'd been standing in, the 15-meter entry point I'd always used. I'd flash stepped left the moment battle pattern analysis tagged the launch prep. It came down on empty stone and was already tracking the adjustment. I'd moved once, it had already recalibrated. Third strike at the landing point, already predicted. I had to flash step left and fate dodge simultaneously. I stood at the south wall breathing, 3 exchanges in 6 seconds. It hadn't used full output. The strikes were calibrated to my movement, not my damage threshold. Fenrir wasn't trying to kill me. It was reading me. Good. That was useful information. I stopped moving. I stood at the south wall and didn't flash step and let the next strike come. It hit me in the chest. A controlled application, the same calibration as the first 3. Storm Aegis absorbed 40% of it. Titan stamina handled the physical impact. Full restoration was already running on the residual burn. I didn't go down. Fenrir paused. The pause was longer than the combat tempo had been setting, a full 2 seconds. Long enough that it wasn't a preparation for the next strike but an assessment. It had hit me with a calibrated strike, and I had not gone down and had not fled, and had done nothing except stand at the south wall and breathe. I said, I saw how the Stormgate Warden moved when the Covenant chain released. Fenrir's chain load shifted, not a movement, but the weight distribution changed, the 16 anchor chains adjusting to a slightly different posture. It went up, I said. Straight through the ceiling. It didn't fight, didn't threaten, didn't engage with me at all, it just left, the moment it could. Wide eyes. You're not going to do that, I said. I know that. You've had the capacity to damage this chamber substantially and you haven't, which means you understand that damaging the chamber doesn't get you out. You've been here 800 years and you've clearly thought about the problem of this room more carefully than any creature I've encountered. I took a breath. I'm not going to ask you to be convinced by words, I think you'd find that insulting. The only thing you'd accept is a demonstration. I looked at the nearest chain anchor. But I think you have a specific thing you want to see demonstrated, and I don't know what it is yet, and I'm telling you that directly rather than guessing. The electrical arcing on Fenrir's coat changed. Not in intensity, in pattern. The chaos crackle settled into something more directional, arcs running in parallel lines along the spine and shoulders, rather than in all directions. A different mode, more controlled. Fenrir moved, not a strike. A repositioning, it turned 90 degrees, presenting its left side. Along the left side, 4 of the 16 chain anchors ran close together, the densest concentration of covenant suppression on its body. It was showing me the chains, not asking me to remove them. Showing them to me. I looked at the chains through soul lantern vision. The royal crests on these 4 were different from the others. Older, the first dynasty's mark, the ones installed 800 years ago when the sealing was done, not the later reinforcements. The originals. These are the primary anchors, I said. The left side repositioning held. If I sever them, I said slowly, thinking through it as I spoke, the remaining 12 take up the load. You don't get free. But the balance of the suppression network shifts, the behavioral suppression, the part of the covenant architecture keeping your full capability locked, that's running through the primary anchors. It wasn't a yes. Fenrir didn't nod or speak or do anything a creature in a story would do to make the interpretation easy. But the chain load was still shifted left, still showing me the anchors. You want to fight at full capacity, I said. You want to be evaluated properly, not a constrained version, the actual thing. I moved toward the 4 primary anchors. The chamber went very quiet. I severed all 4 primary anchors inside 3 seconds. The remaining 12 took the load redistribution, the covenant network compensated. Fenrir remained chained, nothing was freed, but its coat changed. The parallel line arcing dissolved into a third mode, continuous electric cyan across the full coat, every hair a conductor, the output that behavioral suppression had managed now running at full expression. The chamber's electrical field tripled in 2 seconds, and Storm Aegis hit full capacity and stayed there, the storm absorption from the gate now running at its design load. Fenrir looked different. Not larger, it hadn't grown. But the space it occupied felt different, the way a fire that was previously controlled feels different when the wind picks up. Same fire, different relationship to the space around it. The wide eyes found me. Fenrir moved at a speed battle pattern analysis could track, and Fate Dodge could pre-read, but my body could not fully answer at human reaction speed. Fate Dodge routed the first strike 15 centimeters clear. I felt the pressure wave like a physical impact. I flash-stepped, repositioned. The second strike came faster. Fate Dodge gave me a mid-step direction, change Titan stamina made possible. Third, flash step right. Fourth, flat to the floor. The strike passed 2 inches above my spine. I was face down and Fenrir was standing over me. It didn't follow with a 5th strike. I got up. Fenrir was at 5 meters, closer than it had been at any point. The white eyes were running threat assessment mode, not target acquisition mode. It was deciding something. The fight resumed as an exchange structure. Fenrir committing to a sequence, me responding with everything I had, then a pause of 2 to 5 seconds while it observed and modified the next, not how any animal or construct fought. A strategist running a live diagnostic, updating the protocol between iterations. I ran the same process back at it. Sequence 4, Fenrir led with electrical field compression, pushing high conductivity objects from its position. I was 1, running Storm Aegis at full absorption. The compression hit my absorption ceiling and discharged at the walls, and the chamber's resonance changed. All 12 remaining covenant anchors were vibrating at their maintenance frequency, and the discharge had just introduced a harmonic close to, but not exactly, the covenant frequency. I stored that and kept fighting. Sequence 6, I stopped moving entirely. Fate Dodge from stationary ran on a single variable, the strike. It said, left, 3 inches, I went left, 3 inches, and the strike passed. Fenrir paused, 4 seconds. Pack Mind reading gave me, update. It had expected a predictable evasion pattern and gotten minimum displacement precision from stationary. Sequence 7 combined speed with unpredictability, structured to saturate the prediction window, multiple simultaneous outcomes, each needing a different response. It didn't overload. The hair had spent its whole skill arc calibrating against a rare beast's unpredictable movement. Combat mode Fate Dodge was a multi-outcome resolver. It resolved all 7 vectors and gave me the one route that avoided all of them. I took it. Fenrir landed and didn't begin sequence 8. The pause was the longest yet, 8 seconds. Pack Mind reading. for a social intelligence that had been running a complex assessment protocol and had reached a conclusion. The vector that came through was not a word. It was a quality. The specific quality of a decision arrived at after sufficient evidence. I looked at the storm Aegis charge, 94%. I looked at the resonance frequency the discharge had introduced to the Covenant chain system. I looked at Fenrir. I said, "You've been waiting for someone to come in here and not run, not try to force you, not try to free you, not panic, not break, someone who would stay until you'd seen enough." The arcing on the coat was slow now. Still full expression, but slow, deliberate. "I don't know if I'm what you were waiting for specifically," I said. "I don't have a beast. I have a system that turns minor skills into something else, and a moonhair that runs probability math. I've been in this cave for 30 hours, level 34, and none of that tells you whether I'm the right tamer." I kept going. "But I freed the fox. And I freed the warden. And I ran the gauntlet not because I had to, I had the alternate route, but because I thought it existed for a reason worth engaging. And I'm still standing in this room after 9 exchange sequences with something 800 years old, and I'm talking to you instead of trying one more approach to fight you into submission." The storm gray head lowered, slightly. The listening posture. "I want to sever the Covenant chains," I said. "All 12 of the remaining ones. Not to free you. I know that's not possible, the anchor structure runs too deep. But to sever the authority, to make the chains physical without being Covenant authority, so that what you carry is weight, not ownership." A long silence. Fenrir turned, slowly, and laid down on the chamber floor. 16 chain attachment points, suddenly accessible from the top. I walked forward. I severed all 12 remaining Covenant anchors, one by one. Sovereign Chainbreaker applied to each in turn, severing the royal authority from the physical chain without removing the chain itself. It took about 3 minutes. When the last one was done, the chamber went quiet in a way it hadn't been quiet since I entered it. The chains were still there. Physical iron on stone, no longer Covenant instruments. Fenrir lay on the chamber floor. Then it raised its head. The white eyes had changed, not color, the same white, but the texture of the light within them. Less pressure. The specific quality of something that has been held at tension for a very long time and is, for the first time, not. Familiar bond initiated. Tempest Fenrir, legendary, level 81, elects voluntary reincarnation. Classification, restricted familiar, bond active. Authority, partial. Condition, evolving. The reincarnation was different from the moon hairs. Fenrir contracted. The colossal form compressing into density, a concentrated point of storm gray and electric cyan light that settled lower than the hair's warmth, behind my left shoulder blade. A weight that was not physical, but had the character of weight. Restricted familiar. The bond wasn't complete. Fenrir had chosen to acknowledge me, not to fully bind. It would extend itself on my behalf, would lend what it chose to lend, but would not obey commands. A partnership in the same way a person agrees to walk in the same direction for a while. Not commitment. Not ownership. Evolving. The bond type was one that could change. I stood in the empty chamber with the chain weight still on the floor around me and 2 familiars at my back and level 34 on the phone screen and the timestamp showing 26 hours remaining. "Okay," I said. And then the cave started collapsing. The collapse was not immediate. Severing all 16 Covenant anchors had released the load they'd maintained in the suppression architecture, and that load was structural as well as behavioral. The Covenant chain network had been load-bearing in a literal sense, integrated into the cave's stone matrix as reinforcement, and with the anchors gone the matrix started resolving that load the way stone does when the thing holding it suddenly isn't. I heard the first fracture through precision hearing, somewhere in the gauntlet corridor behind me. A subsonic resonance that terrain reading translated as load redistribution, significant, directional toward this chamber. I ran. Fenrir's weight at my left shoulder blade resolved into something external, a compact manifestation, not the colossal form but a concentrated version, storm gray and electric cyan at roughly the size of a large wolf. It appeared beside me as I hit the chamber doorway and matched my pace without prompting. The gauntlet corridor. Terrain reading gave me a stress map showing 3 major fracture lines advancing from the chamber end toward the gate end, the left wall failing faster than the right, the ceiling currently stable, but the right wall fractures propagating upward. I had a route if I moved immediately. Flash step down the corridor, right side bias, 15 meters at a time, Fenrir beside me. The moon hare's combat mode fate dodge was running on the collapsing architecture, the way it had run on the gauntlet constructs, pre-reading fracture outcomes, and routing me away from where the ceiling would come down first. Not how fate dodge was designed to work. The hare was applying it to geology, which was either a generalization of the principle or a sign it was more creative than I'd credited. Probably both. The first ceiling section came down at what had been the 7th Sentinel's position. I was 12 meters past it when it fell. Terrain reading had given me the 2-second warning and I had used it. The gate position was clear. The storm elemental's departure had removed the only thing holding that section in tension. I went through it at a run. The bridge was the problem. The collapse would reach the web thread through its wall attachment points. Terrain reading, both fixtures still intact, but the left one sat in stone with a fracture line advancing 4 meters below it. When that fracture reached attachment depth, the left fixture would fail in about 25 seconds. I could reach the bridge in 15, a 10-second margin to cross 300 meters. Flash step, node to node, the same 14 jump sequence as the inbound crossing. Fenrir manifested beside me in compact form, matching the rhythm without input. The restricted bond apparently included movement synchronization I hadn't known to expect. At jump 6, the surface shifted underfoot, the left fixture loading unevenly. The fracture was advancing faster than projected. 7 seconds now, not 10. At jump 11, the hare's fate dodge spiked into the emergency multi-vector read from Fenrir's sequence 7, every outcome in the next 0.8 seconds at once. The result, go flat, now. I went flat. The left fixture of the thread bridge failed. The bridge swung, one side free, the span converting from horizontal bridge to vertical cable in 2 seconds, the far end arcing into a long pendulum against the chasm wall. I was 15 meters from the far end attachment, still intact, hanging on the thread with Fenrir beside me, claws in the surface. I flash stepped to the attachment, then to the archway. Fenrir was there already, restricted familiar. Evolving bond. The final run through the main cave was less structured, the older upper stone failing more slowly. In the ogre's chamber, the ogre had moved from where I left it, pressing into the far corner, territorial instinct gone to survival. I stopped 3 seconds at the archway. It looked at me, then at Fenrir's compact form, the storm gray coat and electric cyan arcing, and lowered its head toward Fenrir, the same motion it had made after the fight. Not submission. Recognition. I noted it and ran. The main chamber shaft was where we had entered, the 8-meter shaft with the handhold ladder, intact. Fenrir's compact form went up the walls the way it had handled the thread, outside the normal physics of how large things move through small spaces. I went up the ladder. 30 seconds. The cave mouth. Cold air. 2 moons still in the sky, still night, which meant I had been in the cave for more than 30 hours because the sun had come and gone, and I hadn't seen any of it. I stood at the cave mouth with Fenrir compact beside me, and the moon hair's resonance warm at my shoulder. The phone's timestamp, 26 hours, 1 minute remaining. Behind me, the cave made a long grinding sound and went quiet. Level 38. The level up from the escape had come during the bridge section, an objective achievement bonus I hadn't anticipated. I looked toward the north-northeast. The castle. I walked north. Walking back to the castle took most of the rest of the night. I used the time to think in a way the cave hadn't allowed. The king's exile had been a legal calculation, a public removal with the form of an opportunity and the function of a disposal. Doing it publicly meant undoing it required a public justification, and the Demon Lord battle was that justification: participate, produce a visible result, and he couldn't deny me without the record showing he'd thrown away a resource that proved useful. I was coming back early, 26 hours left, the battle in 24. The gap between me and Daiki was no longer expressible in beast tier, but Daiki didn't know that, the court didn't know that, and the only person who knew the false status veil was running was me. The castle came into view around 4 in the morning, lit brighter than the minimal watch lighting of a structure at full night. Activity lighting. The castle was awake. I stopped at the tree line. Fenrir was compact beside me. A wolf form emitting continuous electric cyan lightning was not something you could make unobtrusive, and the false status veil covered my status, not a separate entity. But unnoticed wasn't the goal. The goal was arriving, and the mechanism was the king's own edict: 72 hours to return alive. I was alive, within the window. There was no legal mechanism for refusing my entry. I walked out onto the castle road, Fenrir beside me, the grass blown back by the atmospheric disturbance. A light tracked to Fenrir and held. Then someone was running. The gate captain appeared at the pedestrian entry, 2 guards behind him, a hand near his weapon, and a face working hard at professional neutrality while processing Fenrir. Ranashida, I said. Summoned class. I was exiled on the king's orders with a 72-hour survival deadline. It is not reached. I am alive. I'm here for the Demon Lord battle. The beast, he started, is not a Royal Covenant beast. It doesn't fall under the castle's classification protocols, and my status is unregistered. Your scanners will confirm. Whatever they say, the king's edict gave me 72 hours and I've kept them. A long pause. Then he made the decision I expected. Refusing entry to someone inside the king's own deadline was worse for his career than letting the king resolve it. He stepped aside. I walked through. Fenrir walked through. Behind me, I heard the captain say to the guards, very quietly, "Don't write that in the log, just don't write that." We moved through the lower level without challenge. No guard protocol existed for an unregistered individual escorted by a restricted legendary familiar. I heard the summoning hall before I reached it, the low hum of 42 students and their beasts, the clergy, the morning prep for the battle assembly. This was the room where my circle had gone dark, where someone had laughed first, where Mika had walked 3 steps left and the king had calculated my disposability. 50 hours ago. I opened the hall entrance and walked in. The hall went quiet from the door outward, in a wave, the people nearest processing first, the silence spreading like a stone dropped in water until the whole hall had stopped what it was doing. There was a specific moment when the silence became complete. It was the moment Daiki's Stormwolf lowered its head. I want to be precise about this. The wolf didn't lower its head toward Daiki. It lowered its head toward Fenrir. And it did it before Daiki could speak or command, because the wolf's deep instinct had recognized what was standing beside me. The covenant-bonded wolf recognizing the ancestor. Daiki felt the wolf's movement and looked down. His face moved through about 4 expressions in 2 seconds. He looked at me. I looked at him. "I'm here for the battle," I said. Then, to Daiki specifically, before he could respond, "Stormwolf's instinct is correct. Give it a moment." The wolf stayed head down. Not cowering, it was an A-tier storm beast, but the specific head position of a creature acknowledging a hierarchy in its species' own language. Daiki's hand went to its neck. The wolf waited until Fenrir settled at my right side, then lifted its head. Daiki's face settled into a recognition he couldn't refute, because the beast he was bonded with had just told him the truth of the room. He said nothing. The royal scanner unit moved from the far wall toward me, a device not present during the summoning ceremony, brought specifically for this return. Someone had anticipated my return and prepared for it. The attendant aimed the scanner and waited. ERR-vor, Beer unclassified. No beast registry. No covenant record. DNO system identification. Match. False status veil. It had blocked my system from the scanner entirely. I registered as a human with no beast, exactly what I had been when the king exiled me, and therefore exactly what the king's edict had addressed. An unclassified human who had been given 72 hours and returned within them, legally, unambiguously, on the terms the king himself had set. The king's voice, from the throne position at the far end of the hall, carried across the silent room without being raised. "Bring him forward." I walked forward, Fenrir with me, the class opening a path for something that generated atmospheric lightning. As I passed Daiki, his Stormwolf's eyes tracked Fenrir all the way past. Daiki was looking at the cracked phone in my hand. His expression said, "That phone. The same one." The king was controlled, a man who had probably never had the experience of a situation being controlled by someone else in his own court. His response, an extreme stillness. "What is that?" he said, not a question. "A demand for classification. A familiar," I said. "There is no covenant record." "There wouldn't be," I said. "The bond isn't covenant." He looked at the senior priest who gave a small gesture that meant, "I don't have a category for this either." "The scanner shows no system identification for you. You left this hall 50 hours ago with no beast, no classification, and it still shows none. And yet," he gestured at Fenrir. "I would rather demonstrate than explain," I said. "You were going to have me demonstrate in the Demon Lord battle in 22 hours anyway. The demonstration will be more useful if you're watching for the right things." A very long pause. Then, Cal Orvind. From the right side of the hall, a figure stepped forward from the professional assembly. Cal Orvind, the kingdom's royal beastmaster instructor, the kind of person whose presence said function rather than rank. He'd been taking inventory of the room from the moment the door opened. He looked at me, at Fenrir, at the Stormwolf's position relative to Fenrir. He said to the king, "The wolf's acknowledgement is genuine. The familiar is Stormclass at a tier I don't have a comparison for. The scanner result is consistent with a native origin system, not a summoning origin one." He paused. "He should fight." Daiki said, "He stole something from the royal cave system, whatever that is," indicating Fenrir. "It came from below the castle." Kael Orvin said, "If the kingdom's cave system contained a Stormclass familiar at this tier, someone should have known about it." A longer pause, the whole court in a suspended state of a situation no one's protocol covered. The king said, "He participates in the battle. Under observation. We will discuss classification after." Daiki said nothing. Mika, from somewhere behind me in the assembled class, said nothing. Kael Orvind nodded once. The expression of a man who had gotten the right answer and was not surprised but was still satisfied. I looked at the carved floor with its 43 summoning circles still inlaid in the marble. One of them was mine. It was the darkest one. The phone showed 22 hours, 14 minutes remaining. Level 38, false status veil running. 2 familiars. I found an empty section of wall and stood against it and waited. The Demon Lord anomaly opened without warning. The class was assembled on the deployment field, beasts active, the kingdom's regular forces flanking on both sides, Kael Orvind positioned between them and the student heroes. The anomaly opened over the field. I had expected something that looked like a demon lord, a figure, a face you could address as an enemy. What appeared was a spatial event, an opening in the air above the field, not a door someone was coming through. A breach the enemy was using as a transmitter. Battle pattern analysis engaged, the anomaly wasn't generating its own attack. It was broadcasting a frequency. The exact frequency of the kingdom's covenant chain architecture. Soul Lantern vision made it visible, the signal running through every beast bond in the field simultaneously. And it was hostile, not destroying the bonds but overriding the covenant frequency with a higher power override command. The beasts began to hesitate. Daiki gave his Stormwolf a command. It stepped forward and stopped. He gave it again. The wolf's foot came down and didn't follow through. All around the field, the same pattern, the 50-hour-old student bonds overriding fastest. The Stormwolf stopped moving entirely. Daiki was standing next to a covenant-bonded beast that was no longer responding to its tamer. He looked at me. I had the structure of it. The anomaly was an antenna, a transmission system broadcasting a hostile covenant signal designed to neutralize beast-bonded forces. It knew what the kingdom was. Sovereign Chainbreaker could sever covenant chains. If I severed the transmission tether, the connection between the anomaly and the covenant network, the signal would stop and the bonds would restabilize. I said to KL Orvand, 3 meters to my left. The anomaly is broadcasting on the covenant frequency. It's overriding the bonds. I can cut the transmission tether, but I need 30 seconds of clear access to the anomaly's center. KL Orvand looked at me for about 2 seconds, running his own assessment. Then he turned to the professional force's right flank. Cover fire, right side. Keep the physical manifestations of the anomaly off Ishida for 30 seconds. No one asked him to clarify. He had an authority that didn't come from rank. I moved. Fenrir uncompressed to something between compact and colossal, its stormcoat clearing a path through the smaller manifestations at the field edges. The Moonhair's fate dodge worked harder than it had in the chamber, the projections partially random. 15 seconds in, I'd taken 2 glancing hits, full restoration running continuously. At second 20, the anomaly's center was visible in the Soul Lantern vision layer, the transmission point. The tether wasn't a physical chain but a frequency, the same authority structure expressed as broadcast. Sovereign Chainbreaker's severed authority, that was what it did. I reached the center at second 23 and severed the tether. The hostile signal cut out. Across the field, 42 beasts reoriented at once. Daiki's Stormwolf raised its head, shook itself, stepped forward. The anomaly was still open. But the signal was gone. Without the transmission, the anomaly was just a breach, a hole maintained by one structural tether, the way the thread bridge had hung from its attachments. Cut the tether and it would collapse. Something in the restricted bond communicated the situation to Fenrir without a command. It moved to the other side of the attachment point. I severed the tether from my side, and Fenrir discharged at the same moment into its free end, grounding the structural energy before it could redistribute. The breach closed. The manifestations dissolved. The field went quiet. The phone, level 38 maintained. Experience allocated. New skill acquiring, BATL Roar, Sucombat passive common, amplifying. Memorwall, BEAST King Pressure's Authority class, field effect. The skill activated passively, without me directing it, an authority class field effect broadcasting from my position at the covenant frequency, the exact frequency the anomaly had just spent 30 seconds trying to override. My frequency, broadcasting naturally, the way Fenrir's output generated environmental charge just by existing. Every beast on the field turned toward me at the same moment. Not threateningly. The same recognizing turn the Stormwolf had made toward Fenrir in the hall, the instinctive response to a frequency that ran deeper than the Covenant architecture. Daiki's Stormwolf turned last. Turned fully. And put its head down. I stood in the field with the aftermath of a closed anomaly and 2 familiars and a field effect skill I hadn't known I was about to acquire. Looking at 42 beasts all oriented toward me. And I said nothing because there was nothing useful to say, and the situation had already communicated itself to everyone watching. KL Orvand beside me. That was not in any manual I've read. No, I said. The skill you used to close the breach. What was it? Something I learned in the cave under the castle. The kingdom's cave system was more interesting than its records reflect. He looked at me a long moment, a man who'd encountered evidence that the system he'd worked inside had a larger design than he'd been told. Then, toward the castle wall, he should be evaluated. Daiki looked over. What did you do to my wolf? He said. Not angry, genuinely asking. I didn't do anything to your wolf. What you saw is what happens when a covenant-bonded beast recognizes something that outranks the covenant. Your wolf knows what it is. That doesn't change what it is to you. He looked at the wolf. The wolf looked at him. Beast King pressure was still running, but the field effect was orientation, not control. They were still their tamer's beasts, the covenant still intact. I just ran at a frequency they recognized. Daiki looked at the phone in my hand, then back at me. He said, okay, it was not much. But it was not nothing either. The king's court arrived. Emissaries, courteous language, the meaning, evaluation, no independent action until there's a protocol. KL Orvand said, evaluation, not containment. That is what the king intends, the emissary said. I said I agreed to the evaluation. The phone gave me one more notification. Not a skill, not a level. A new category, hidden class Kois unlocked. 3 options. White text on black, Familiar Tamer, Master of Beast Bonds, Covenant Free. Path. Expand bond count, cultivate depth of partnership with multiple familiars. Beast Conqueror. Authority First Path. Forced submission bonds, sovereign override, beast subjugation through power rather than partnership. Human Beast, native frequency evolution. Path. The bearer system evolves toward the beast frequency natively, closing the gap between tamer and tamed. I read all 3. The third was what the Silver Fox had implied, and what the Beast King Pressures activation had just demonstrated. Not controlling beasts, resonating with them. Not above them, not commanding them. Becoming the frequency they recognized. The 47 days suppression counter finally had a shape too. The system hadn't switched on when I crossed the barrier, it had been sealed and waiting long before my class ever arrived, for a bearer it could run through. I hadn't been chosen at that ceremony. I'd been matched to something that had been waiting for me. I selected Human Beast. Class confirmed, Human Beast. The class registered and went quiet. No dramatic change. The field effect was already running, the familiars already present, nothing visible to anyone watching. I looked at the field, 42 beasts reoriented back to their tamers, Daiki standing with his Stormwolf at his heel, the closed anomaly point where nothing remained. For a moment the field had no immediate claim on me, the professional force reorganizing behind me, the emissaries not yet arrived, Daiki somewhere to my left talking to his wolf in a low voice. I looked at the cracked screen in my hand. 3% battery, same as when I had come out of the cave. The moon hair shifted from somewhere near my collar and settled onto my left shoulder, its weight slight enough to forget if you were not paying attention. Behind me, Fenrir's ambient lightning had drawn inward, not absent, just resting, the arcs running slow along its spine rather than outward into the air. The electricity that had closed a breach in reality now pulsed quiet as a heartbeat. The quiet lasted maybe 15 seconds. It was private enough to count for something. Everyone in my class had been summoned and given beasts through a system the kingdom called a covenant. Every beast in that system was carrying a cage that their tamers didn't know was a cage. I had no beast. I had a moon hare that chose me over being caught. An ancestor Stormwolf that chose recognition over 800 years of alternatives. A frequency that a whole field's worth of beasts had turned toward when they heard it. They had laughed because I couldn't summon a beast. They had thrown me out because I had nothing. I put the phone in my pocket. The cracked screen. Still 3% battery, still warm. Behind me, Fenrir settled into rest position. The moon hare's warmth ran at my shoulder. The kingdom thought they threw away a failed summoner. They had released something that summoners were not. Now they had one.